Good evening, everyone. Woo! I want to welcome you to a regular meeting for the Hastings-on-Hudson Board of Education for March 11th, 2025. The large presentation tonight, and probably while you're all here, most of you, is the instructional part of our budget. And we're going to start off with, because our students are very studious and very busy and have stuff to do, we're going to start off with our student report. So thank you both, Kai or Ella, whoever wants to start first.
So the Multicultural Book Fair is at Hillside on March 12th through 14th. In addition to a great collection of books that celebrate all identities, there will be a signing opportunities and a panel of authors featuring Rio Cortez, Vera Hiranandani, and Shira Chari. I'm so sorry. The panel will be moderated by the HHS Affinity Club. This Saturday is the Westchester Science and Engineering Fair for science research students. There they will be presenting their projects filled with months-long dedicated and hard work. They will be judged and have a chance to win awards for their categories. So good luck to all our seniors and juniors competing. And now Hillside Youth Book Fair is from the 21st to the 22nd, which is next week on Friday and Saturday. So make sure to pack your kids' money if they want to purchase some repurposed books. Okay.
Sticking with our Hillside trend, this past week was the wonderful 4th grade production of Finding Nemo. They were fantastic. The singing was amazing. The dancing was in sync. It was really incredible. I'm very excited to watch these young performers grow and learn on their path through the Hastings High School theater productions. This Friday is a very exciting event for the high school. We have our annual Olympics. So we have been having some trivia questions in with our regular morning announcements, and those are contributing towards points. It's a grade-on-grade fun time and little competition, and we are going to have different activities where members of each grade will be competing. We have sports events like volleyball and pickleball, spike ball tournaments. We have some crossword competitions. We have doodle games. It's a whole bunch of stuff going on, and it will end in a wonderful lip sync battle. If you would like to see our lovely Ella perform, that's something that I'm sure videos will be taken of. At the varsity state track meet, we had 2 amazing students who got their own winnings. We have Danae Morgan, who is in 15th place for the shot put. And we have Caitlin Thomas, who finished 6th in the NISFA, 7th in the Federation, and she set a new school record time of a 9-minute, 49-second, 68-millisecond, 300-meter dash. So huge congrats to both of them. And another winning streak after days of hard work and competition. Our very new robotics team finished in 15th at the Hudson Valley Regional First Robotics Competition. So huge, huge congrats to the co-presidents, the rest of the team, staff advisors, and everybody else who helped along the way. Go Bionic Buzzers.
Thank you, thank you. Kai, can I ask you a quick question? Because I think you may know the answer. I remember we approved something in February. When is the 5th and 6th grade musical going to be Mamma Mia? Is that correct? Does anybody know?
The high school musical is Mamma Mia.
I was wondering.
The musical.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Catherine, you don't have a mic.
Oh, that's true. We have one mic for Catherine? Oh,
To
so
repeat,
it's premature
5th and 6th
then.
grade is the high
Oh,
school
you have
musical.
2 there? Oh, there's one extra one here.
I
So.
have students in both of those performances.
Oh.
So yeah, 6th grade is High School Musical the 2nd, and high school is Mamma Mia.
Okay, I'm just looking forward to it. Thank you both. Thank
Once again, another performance opportunity to see Ella. I'm going to take every opportunity to embarrass her here.
you. We look forward to it. Thank you both very much. Moving on.
Before we start, I just want to check on the public seating, because it's a little weird that everybody's off over there, and I'm worried you cannot see. Are you all okay over there, or should we move a little bit? Right? You're okay over there? All right.
Thank you for checking. So we'll start with our presentation on the proposed instructional budget. And to start that process off, before we get in the granular detail, we're going to welcome Dr. McCursey to give us an overview of the themes that were present this year. So thank you. Dr. McCursey, take it away.
Now I'm blocking everybody. I think you'll see over this stuff. Well, good evening. This will be quite a substantial presentation. We gave a version of it earlier today to all staff in a voluntary meeting. That clocked at about 60 minutes. I think this may go a little bit longer. I'd ask the board to hold your questions till we're done, because this really builds and goes through things quite thoroughly. Some have said, why such a big detailed presentation? My answer is, in a district with such thoughtful, deep thinking staff, in a community, in a village with such deep thinking, critical thinking residents, most importantly for our students, we need to bring the details. We need to bring the facts. So there's going to be information in the presentation tonight that makes very, very clear where we're headed, if the board agrees, next school year. As some dates will show in here, tonight we present in great, great detail. And then you'll have several meetings to probe, to ask questions. There'll be many opportunities for public comment. You will vote on this budget in whatever form you modify it to on April 22nd. So you had the first half of this budget on a set of areas. This is the instructional part. All parts of a budget are important. This is especially important. Before I start, I'm going to go to a little riff. I've been in this field since 1981. In the last 24 hours, I have seen institutions that I know about and care about have significant issues. Harvard has announced an entire hiring freeze. Tonight, half of the U.S. Department of Education will be laid off. Districts not too far from us are going to be looking at potentially, not us and not our riverfront districts, but those with many low-income students could be looking at quite significant reductions. So I would ask us, as we think about the particulars of this budget that we may have struggled with, that we are building with this budget an educational oasis. We are building an educational oasis. If you care about being in a school system that provides nearly everything possible for our children, this budget will do it. If you care about working in a district where all but one or two people who currently work here will be here next year, this is the budget you want. But I put that riff out there right now because I do pay attention to current events. I do pay attention to how they relate to my current life and my past life now. In education right now, it is a difficult place to be if you have children in the system, if you work in the system. In Hastings, we're trying to be an oasis away from all of that. So let me get into the presentation. So this will be big. I'm going to spend about 30 to 40 minutes on some factual themes, the narrative. I will layer into this some numbers and figures. The second part, Maureen Carvello, our business official, will give, I'd say, the more classic, standard, very detailed analysis. This is not the presentation that our students use in their classrooms with all our great teachers, because it's immense in detail, but that's purposeful. So people can come back to it, they can study it, it's here. And you as a board can study it and look at it. Dates I've mentioned, we're in a process here. You can see where we are. April 22nd is when you as a board will vote, and then the village will vote on May 20th in terms of whatever budget you adopt as of the 22nd of April. Purpose of the budget, this was in the first document you saw on February 11th. It's important to keep going back to what we stand for at the core. People can read that. I would raise up the portrait of the Hastings learner as essential, but also that top one. We want resources to educate all of our students. And we believe that this budget does that, and also note the word in there, strategic. We think this is an especially strategic budget at this point. That means in my mind, yes, this coming year, but future years. The budget...
Bill, I'm sorry, could you just hold the mic a little closer? Yeah, I think
okay.
Thanks.
Wow, that's rare. People can't hear me. Budget goals, again, those were in the previous document. But again, we want to stress how those are core to what we are doing here and building what you see. Let me start with the tough news, narrative-wise, and then I'm going to go to the good news. First off, this budget is built on a set of financial constraints and trade-offs. Don't worry, I'm not going to read every word on that slide. You can go back and read it later. That critical constraint is rightly so, the board has insisted to me as superintendent that we stay within cap. And you can see that figure up there, 3.66%. That's being responsive to the residents, the taxpayers of Hastings. You can see our push forward amount, though, is well north of that at 4.36%. And as Maureen goes through certain details, we'll come to understand how we made that difference work, so we actually have a budget that does move us forward. Another big point, we are still dealing with the after effects of the failed budget in 22-23. As is laid out there, that meant there was some $1.1 million below the tax levy. That's had a compounding effect on us as we've tried to build forward. That budget was the first failed budget in 40 years. It happened to be my first year here. Very soon after that, we ran it again, and it passed, I think, 80%. Families came out. They saw the significance. Having said that, we still financially are we're moving forward from that. We're trying to address that issue. If we had not had that failed budget, we would be in a very different conversation right now in terms of cash reserves for a number of things that we're allowed to use that money for. So my plea at the front of this is that really those 2 points together. We will debate, we'll discuss, we'll deliberate. This budget may be modified, but at the end of it, I'm asking the board to agree. I'm asking you to agree 7-0, and that we pass this budget, and then when it moves out into the village, I'll be asking the village to pass this budget. There may be aspects of it, particular pieces that you don't like, but that's standard for budgets. The larger whole is what we have to care about. And if you want any evidence of why that matters, go back to that failed budget a couple years ago. Because if this budget does not pass, the conversation we will be having in Hastings will tie right back to that riff I talked about. We will take away our ability to be an oasis in education right now at this point in our nation and region. Now let me go to the good news. And I'd ask people to listen very carefully to some of the numbers I'm going to share in a second. Despite our fiscal challenges, this is actually a strong budget. It's going to move us to even higher ground. I am having us think about this budget as a K-12 system of schools. That's that strategic point I made earlier. Each school here and each department is treated very, very well. Building forward, I as superintendent am responsible for bringing this budget to you. I am the one who you should raise your concerns with if you don't like what's in the budget. It's been built on a lot of listening, a lot of probing, a lot of activity. Yes, the last couple of months with administrators, but I'm active and around with staff, students, families. And in the last week or so, because I have such good connections, people are bringing their concerns to me. I'm hearing those concerns. So this is a budget built to advance our K-12 system. I own all the decisions in this budget ultimately. Brought to me by a team, with me critically reviewing them, but that is my job to bring you as a board a budget. Things you really like in it, thank the team. Things you're concerned about, bring them to me. Because this is about a K-12 advance. In this budget are some very specific efforts we'll get to about ways to maximize what we're doing for our student programming, advance that, and also we knew we were hitting a potential tough couple years, so the early retirement package last year was designed to allow long-serving, wonderful faculty retire in grace, and I mean that word purposefully, and also then provide some flexibility in the budget as we went into some particularly tricky years. We also knew that this year, right now, this spring, we're in negotiation with our 3 bargaining units. We needed to create space, so we had a shot at settling on a very competitive agreement, one that they would find by and large, in any negotiation, it's by and large satisfactory. So that's that other aspect of, yes, this is strategic looking forward, but where we've arrived here is based on some strategic thinking the last couple of years. Here's a key figure to look at. This budget, for all of our difficulty, increases district-wide, or FTE, by 1.7. It increases by 1.7 FTE. At the high school, there's a net reduction of 0.2. A net reduction of 0.2. A 1.8 reduction relative to a 1.6 increase. We'll come to those specifics later in good detail, and in later meetings we can probe and try and understand that. But those are the clear, definite facts of the matter here. So we think with that modest change in our staffing that we're able to continue the critical, vital work that's been going on and have at most, with that slight change in staffing and faculty, a modest change on both class sizes, electives, and other opportunities. So what I've been trying to do in bringing you this budget, listening to the team, is again build this in the sense of K-12. How can Hastings get that much better at thinking about what happens in Hillside, having that connect well into the middle school, and having that connect well into the high school? I've been here long enough now to say some of that we're really good at, and some of it we need to improve. And in particular, we see an opportunity to build on the strengths of Hillside that's been built here for a number of years, to help the very excellent faculty of the middle school then get to even higher ground, and then keep the high school as strong as possible. But at the core of this budget is a plan to bring resource to the middle school, not to undercut Hillside, not to undercut the high school, but really think K-12 in the flow of our students. I've been here long enough to know when I see the 12th graders, most of them have been here since early elementary. When I guest read with the elementary, I look at them and say, you will be in 12th grade. You will be in 11th grade, 12th grade. What are we providing you in a good progression all the way through? That's what this budget is about. So with a system of schools and the FMS focus in building a budget in very tight fiscal times, there are things we had to consider, but they are in this budget. We remain deeply committed in this district to diversity and inclusion. Right now, there's a parent system with the Department of Ed could say, you could report me for saying that on a document. I could be reported to the U.S. Department of Education for that second bullet. I am proud to have that second bullet there. Below that, we are maintaining fully what we have this year in music, art, world language, particularly Latin, in the ICT structure as it relates very, very important to special education. But these are some of the headlines on things district-wide we will continue. Now, Hillside. I will go into each building here. I'm not going to read you each bullet. Again, there's a lot of detail here. I urge you to study it, reflect on it, and we have multiple meetings plus multiple public comments to look at it. I said to the staff today, I'm willing to meet in any size grouping to talk about what they heard if they want to understand it better. But there is what Hillside is maintaining. Think of my riff at the beginning. This is an incredible list of what we're maintaining with this budget at Hillside. The great wonders and glory of this school, and I'm in it a lot, is maintained on that slide. Also maintained are what you see here. And again, I'm not going to read it to you. You can read better than I can. Up there, key substantive areas, content areas. Again, thinking about the progression of our students as they head to the middle school. There are some efficiencies, some reductions. As you'll see across the budget, we have found, while still honoring our E&L students, we have found ways to have efficiency there, to provide them the programming they will need with a modification in staff. Similarly with physical education, that's a slight reduction, 0.2, and a teaching assistant reduction in 2 monitors. So Hillside, as you know it, will be the Hillside next year. A lot on the next several slides. A lot of detail here for the Farragut plan. This ties to a presentation the board had in January 2024 from Mr. Scott Wynn, laying out the FMS action plan. It's comprehensive, it's robust, and we're actually able to bring it to you in this budget quite efficiently, as you'll hear later in terms of staffing. You can read this, but let me hit the headlines. This addresses overall class size within FMS. We're going to look at the master schedule. I actually should say Mr. Wynn and Mr. Waldeck with the faculty and staff will do that, but they're going to be looking at that to really optimize, maximize what that schedule does. There'll be new staff hired very selectively. Again, not to take anything from the other 2 schools, but again, to think of this sense of a K through 12 flow that are critical to areas that have been identified for a while as needing attention. I listen to parents. I listen to families. Very hardworking middle school, and also how do we help it get better? That's been what I've been consistently hearing since I arrived here. English language arts, it's spelled out there what would be in this plan. Mathematics, an area where, let's be honest, we can do better in Hastings. For all the hard work of our faculty, we can do better there. And this is designed to go right into that very issue that I've heard a great deal about. Science. This plan will allow science in the middle school to get to a more robust, productive level. Another area where at the high school, science research we'll come back to in a second, very strong, but how do we provide more of a flow for students in science as they through the middle school? Social studies, bringing in financial literacy, economics for the 8th grade students, as an example. Thinking about that real world context in a little more grounded, definite, rigorous way. We may think here about some of the additional types of opportunities we had for students that families have said, and staff have said to me, it may not be exactly what we want to do. So Mr. Wynn and Mr. Waldeck, working with faculty, will look at that. World language, holding on to, but potentially thinking about a heritage Spanish program for native speakers. Thinking still to hold on to it, but how can we do that much better? Special education, I said at the outset, this is a through line in all of what we're doing here. There's a lot of good news for us in special education. High quality work within a budget. In some districts right now, they're struggling on a budget due to costs related to special education. That is not where Hastings is. Do not let a discussion start in this village that it's a lead verse. No. When we're great with special ed, we are great for gen ed and vice versa, and this is where we've been thanks to the work of Laura Sullivan and others, and we'll get to who's coming in later. Exploring equity, that is the former Courageous Conversations course, totally redone. Again, listening to families, how can we do that better? But how do we look at that at an even different, advanced level? Executive function would be a new thing at the middle school, but critical for middle grades, middle school age students. Special areas, we want to keep that commitment that's been so important to us in Hastings, and how do you deepen that within the middle school? And then there's a very strong conclusion there written by Mr. Wynn, Mr. Waldeck about what this would mean to the middle school. So again, I would urge you to study this. This is one of the key pieces of this budget we're bringing to you. The high school. There are several parts to what I'm going to share here. First is, yes, there will be some changes, but 95 to 90%, 99% of what you know about this high school this year will be the same next year, plus how do we make it better? Anxiety, nervousness, concerns about information out and about in the village, which I've heard about. This is now my moment to put a very detailed set of information out for families, out for the board to look at, absorb. We are not cutting this high school to the bone. We are keeping the high school largely as is. And let's be clear, these are decisions I have made based on listening to people. These are decisions relative to this K-12 focus that would be made now no matter who was leading that high school. Because its time has come to have that high school be that much stronger and part of the K-12 system. Big news, that's science research, expanding that. We've been asked to do that for a while. We are building that into this budget. Expanding our continuum of special education services. Very powerful theme again to us in Hastings and what we're doing. Permanent testing center. Unfortunately, and this relates to the bond, we've had high schoolers unable to take high-stakes assessments, check-ins, all the rest in defensible spaces. It's not good when I sit with a group of 12 students this spring and they tell me for me to do some of my check-in assessments, I had to go out of the room. I had to find some other place to go. That's not Hastings. And the staff has known that, families have known that, so we've built this into the budget. So there is important new things here for the high school. Second, go into the program of studies. Go into what's featured there above in that statement, continued excellence. Nearly all of that will continue. All of that will be there. These are the adjustments. There's a lot on that slide that lead to that mathematical outcome of FTEs. And like it or not, particularly in public education, and I've worked independent schools in higher ed, we staff on decibels. Part of that's contractual. Part of that's other reasons. Everywhere I've been in the public ed, they say, why decimals? But we kind of are there. But that is why that math works. And you can see the additions, the science research, the teaching assistant for testing center, special ed for consultant math and science to provide additional support there, the special ed additions, to cover any changes that might occur down the road as we think about HASP or PL. But then there are reductions, a 0.4 in social studies, a 0.4 in English, and a 1.0 in math. I wanted to dig more deeply into this. What would this really mean with these shifts and changes, especially with all the very good concerns and anxieties coming into me, coming into others based on how extraordinary Hastings High School has been for so long. So we've put together these charts. These are a first look, but this is a solid look. This is a solid look. I'd ask you here in social studies to look at the average class sizes. It is average, but we would be committed to staying there. Those are, as we currently know, contractually and otherwise, those are within the acceptable range with that cap at 24. You see the listing there of electives potentially reduced or run in fewer numbers, and you see there in parens the number of students involved. Again, you can go back and study this. In English, you see here the impact on class sizes, staying anywhere from 19 to 21, which is in the range we've been in, average. And you see there the elective questions in terms of several of those courses, number of students, and how to manage the sections of those. This is still a work in progress, but board, this gives you a sense even right now with those reductions that I listed where we would be. Now given that, and I'm sorry, math, you can see where those class sizes are, again, largely where we've been, and also what might be in some question areas in terms of student enrollment, what's there. What's very important to me here is, as we listen to the board, as we work with these, we want to keep looking at ways to keep that class size where it is and even lessen the number of electives. If you go into the program of studies relative to those courses maybe in question, you can see it's a very small number. Now here's something I have to say. I've only worked in high-performing places, particularly with high-performing high schools. Every high-performing high school year to year has to make adjustments in the electives. And often they have to not offer those for financial reasons, even the best of those institutions. Hastings may have avoided that challenge that is before us. We want to minimize what that means for our students, especially students who've run, which is most, run that long race from K through 12, may get to 11th grade, 12th grade expecting something and it's not there. We want to manage that very carefully. So we're looking then at academic intervention services. If you go to that bottom sentence, some of those services only have 5 students at a time. Only 5 students at a time. In some cases, that's exactly right. In many cases, you don't need that tight of a teacher-student ratio. HASP is one of the features of this system. I know that. I've been here long enough to know that. And the work and leadership of Peter Scotch and before him others, with Greg Smith along the ways, it's built an oasis, as described there, for students who need that. We do have resource issues there. Sometimes it's a small class of 5. I've been around this world a long time. HASP is excellent, and programs like HASP often have a little larger ratio than that and get the same outcomes and same results. So that's something we would be looking at very thoughtfully. If those 2 areas don't allow us to address this issue of class size and keep it where we want, minimize the loss of electives, we will circle back to the 2 on this slide. Optimizing class sizes, which is how do you think about what's that best number might we be, which is very typical, having to not offer in a given year. That doesn't mean it goes away forever, but not often in a given year a certain elective. Similarly with the enrollment numbers in classes. We want to keep those in that level listed on the chart. We have many classes well below that. We also have classes sub 10. Most districts around us are very much looking at anything sub 10. I can assure you that those riverfront districts right next to us are now having to do the same thing. At least look at them and think about what's the impact on a student and their trajectory. Special education. We have worked really, really hard under Laura's leadership, backed up by Tessa and Maria Angela, with the coordinators, the entire team, to live out this commitment. Those are actually my words. I care about those words. I care about leading a district that stands up for all of that. And I think that's where we have been increasingly the last several years. And this budget is very, very strong on special ed and that commitment. Yes, we're making a change in how we lead this entire area. Most of you have been following that in notes and materials. I put here so you have it in detail, summary more here, what we'll be doing. We're establishing an assistant superintendent for PPS. After a robust search, my listening to the team, that meant people as part of the advisory committee, that was parents, staff, others, said, let's think about an interim. Let's have someone, if they're out there, who's done this work, done it at a very high level, come in and help us figure out what's the best next step here in Hastings to build on the work of Laura Sullivan, joined by Tessa and Maria Angela. So we were very fortunate, and we can do this at a budget savings. I want the village and you to know that. It's a savings of some $60,000 for the coming year. We've been able to do that by appointing Jean Ferrigio. You saw materials on Mrs. Ferrigio, as she prefers to be called, but her record within this couple state area is unparalleled. As several people said to me who are quite expert leading very successful districts, simply put, wow, if you can land Jean for the coming year, you've done wonderful things for what it says at the bottom. You've done wonderful things for your students, your families and staff. You've done wonderful things in terms of bringing expert insights, and Jean would be at the table starting right away, here right at the top of the district, and help give us advice and feedback on what the next steps are. And yes, provide all kinds of good coaching for this superintendent and the rest of us who, you know, always need some coaching on how to best make this happen. So we were very much looking forward to that as a key way to strengthen and build on special ed. Here are key highlights on what we're doing. Again, I won't read you the whole slide, but seeing there the ICT structure. We're adding lab support for earth science in the middle school. That's been a point of struggle for many of our students. Expanding the ICT in English also as well, which has been an area of concern. Adding a consultant teacher to the high school. These are all areas that people have said we need additional help. So working with the tax cap, we're doing this. And then maintain students in the district by expanding programs. We want our students here. And in fact, part of the budget, as Maureen will explain later, we're not naming names. We have some wonderful students who I've come to know really, really well who should be in the district. Their families want them in the district. And by providing that space here, they're in their village, they're in their town, and it just works out better all the way around. So this is the types of things we're building into this budget. We also are a system of opportunities in terms of extracurricular programs. This budget maintains our highly participatory-oriented athletic program. 55 teams with the participation that's this year you see up there. We're going to keep the Hastings ski team. It's been a pilot, it'll be now a regular team. The parents have agreed to sort of a cost share on that, given it's a program with particular costs. Really important to me is continuing the full-time athletic trainer. I'm around to our events a lot. He is so vital to who we are and what we do, and I've heard that and seen that a lot. Maintaining athletic-based clubs. Very important to me. And Bobby, I love first names, you'll hear from him. He started something called the Student Athletic Committee. That type of work will continue. Plus, we'll continue in this budget targeted equipment and facility upgrades. That's separate from the bond. Extracurricular programs is so much more robust than those 3 bullets. But we are continuing everything that's been so rich here in terms of our music, our theater, our visual arts, our performing arts. That all will continue. Go back to that idea of being an oasis. Districts are cutting that stuff right now given the situation. We are not doing that in this budget. We are maintaining it. So to repeat, and I'm about to hand this off. You want detail? It's about to come. This budget helps us think and act more rigorously as we think Hillside, FMS to HHS. We have been great at the individuals. We have to get stronger at the schools. We've got to get better at the K-12. That's what this budget is on. And yes, that's been my commitment, listening to the team, listening to the families, to build it that way. So despite this immediate context of financial challenge, remember my opening riff on what our context is. this budget will advance Hastings at a K-12 level as a system of schools, departments, programs, and opportunities. So a lot here. I'm going to now turn it over to Maureen, who will stay there.
Can I have the clicker?
You can have the clicker.
Yes, thank you.
Bill, thank you very much. Welcome, Maureen.
Hello, good evening. Once we get the clicker, we'll begin. Nice. Yeah, that would be perfect, thank you. And this one works.
Yeah,
okay.
can I hop in?
course.
I was undecided, but I think I wanted to pause between both of you just to see if there's
Sure.
any questions
That
from
makes
the,
sense.
or comments from the trustees. Jody? you have anything? No?
I
Is the
don't
mic
think
on?
that's working.
May answer them in the detail section.
Oh,
Does it relate to what he said? If it, if you think it might be useful.
Well, there are a lot of details coming, that's why.
okay, never mind.
Okay.
Later.
I mean, if
All
it's
right.
a detail-related question, you'll,
Yeah, Alex, would you want me to pause between each area to allow for questions, or do you want to hold till the end for the board?
I guess if somebody gets anxious and raises their hand, we'll
Okay.
stop, but
Yeah,
yeah.
because sometimes it may be within the slide we're discussing.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So as Bill said, tonight I'm going to now go through the actual numbers based upon what Bill shared tonight and how that breaks out against the various areas included in the instructional budget. As a reminder, on February 11th, we presented what is considered the non-instructional portion of the budget to the board, and those designations are provided to us by the state the way they categorize expense categories. So last week, and some of that, obviously, just as a reminder, are flagged on this major drivers of expense slide, because last time we spoke in great detail about our health insurance increases, which of course, although it's considered as part of the undistributed budget, it is in fact a large component of expense, and it is related to everyone who work here, the health insurance related to the employees of the district. So just as a reminder, that one area of the budget, the benefits area of the budget, was over $1 million of increase. And without touching anyone's salaries or anyone getting any type of increases, Bill had mentioned, we are in contractual negotiations now. And the first item there, of course, is again, cost drivers, right? So as Bill said, we needed to ensure and plan and protect monies to be available for that purpose. And when we built this budget, that was a big consideration in how much money do we set aside for that that purpose, because then that also, other things flow from that. But again, as a reminder, this is a third year in a row we're dealing with very high health insurance increases, and has put a lot of pressure on our budget. So I just think it's really important to flag that again. And the other items, again, are things we speak to about class sizes, particularly at Hillside, ICT section, things of that nature that drive some of the expenses here. And again, we continue to have other capital expenses and related to the infrastructure of the school. Thank you. So again, these are things each year, and these are just, again, we've discussed this before, and currently, thankfully, when we get to the revenue part of the budget, we'll look at those numbers in greater detail. But the good news is, as Bill he was sharing his good news, the good news is that our current projected state aid is in fact increasing. The governor's budget reflects an increase of educational funding for all schools in New York State. And again, that was welcome news, because I think coming off of last year, where the governor previously in last year's budget proposal that she presented, she spoke a lot about making some significant drastic changes to funding, which would have had some significantly, especially for a district like Hastings, would have had a negative context to those proposed changes. And this year, many folks like myself were very happy to see that her budget, in fact, pulled back from some of those things she spoke about, maybe related to it being an election year or whatever the case may be. But currently, when we started this budget process, we were glad to see that we have an increase in state aid. But again, we do always have to be cautious about the state funding. I think we're comfortable in what we've been having as part of our budget, but again, if something were to change at the state, that again would have we'd have to address that. And again, just at the district level, there's the external factors such as the state, and then internally, we, as many districts believe, it's extremely important to go to the tax cap when possible. And of course, this year we had to go to it, but again, it's important to, we have very limited avenues for revenue, and that sometimes leaving some money on the table can potentially have long-term impacts to us. Reminder, our budget to budget change is currently at 4.48%. We were then required only to be able to increase the levy. So again, our expenses are outpacing our allowable tax levy, right? So thankfully this year we did have other revenues, and we'll go into greater detail to offset that. I just want to highlight for our residents that although the proposed tax rate increase, and this is a function of the increased assessed valuation of the town, is showing to be negative, in fact, this budget, the expenditure plan of this budget would likely, for most individuals in town, increase people's taxes. So the negative doesn't mean that it's, going to cost you less. It's just the way that is calculated, which is beyond the way we have to do that calculation. So again, thanks, this is just a snapshot, and as we go through, and again, as Bill said, we're not going to go line by line here, but this basically all the ins and outs, puts it on one slide, and as we go through the functioning areas, we'll show you where those particular either increases or decreases are factored in. But as Bill said, and although this is teaching staff plus, again, teacher assistants are also considered instructional staff in the district. There are some other folks like nurses, and these are based on individual student need, as well as an increase in the guidance secretary that was actually this year scheduled not to be replaced, but in fact, we found that we needed to fully fund that again. But this is again a net change of staff, and we are in fact increasing 1.7 when we factor in all of our staffing changes. Again, Bill went through this earlier. There's just some dollars connected to what we anticipate these additional positions at Farragut Middle School will cost us. And there's some variation, and it's really based upon the different hires. So MTSS would likely be someone with a little bit more experience, different, probably a few licenses, potentially reading and special ed and different things like that. So those positions typically cost more to hire for. And then the remainder you see here, and these are connected to the plan that was laid out in the earlier part of the presentation. Again, Bill went through these earlier. They really break down in greater detail how these different FTE adjustments are arrived at, because some of them are due to shifts. I'll just pull out one example here with, in regards to social studies. Currently, a member of the social studies department teaches AP psychology, which is a 0.4 of their assignment. Next year, the person who teaches that is actually already retired and came back to work for us this year. Knowing this was already planned last year, that there was faculty in the science department that would be teaching that, because I guess they have to do some work to be able to teach that, Melissa? Is there planning and?
Just in terms of the articulation.
Yeah, the articulation of it. So again, these were things that were coming from last year's budget plan changes. So that's why some of the FTEs, although we may not be replacing a particular member, because there were other shifts that are going on internally, and they're laid out here. And as another example of that, the current HASP director is retiring. He's an English teacher. If another individual outside, it's not required to be an English teacher to be the director of HASP. So there may be some ins and outs of other departments. So we have factored in some flex, like a 0.4, depending on who ends up with the peer leadership or the HASP, that may impact different departments. So we did factor that in here in these calculations. So that's why some of them are, you have to kind of read some of the details included to understand how those FTEs are derived. But, I can answer questions later if you have any further. And as Bill had mentioned, there is an increase beyond even these numbers, because they are increasing the ICT sections in the 9th and 10th grade in English from 2 sections to 3, as well as creating support for 10th. Currently there's I don't believe there's any support for math and science in any grade above ninth grade for special education, and this budget does include staffing those. And again, this is a piece of the entire budget proposal. We covered this earlier at an earlier presentation, that this does include a $275,000 transfer for capital funds to address some extremely needed capital improvements that cannot wait till a bond is done. So we are making that recommendation here. And we did go through in detail in the last presentation what that included. Again, budget overview. These are just the things that we spoke about earlier in terms of major drivers of the budget. As Bill said, with just rolling over our current budget plus anticipated student placement out of district for some of our special ed children, we started with a budget-to-budget number of $3 million, which actually at one point grew to almost $3.8 million before we got it back to where we are. And some of it was due to initially thinking some additional students would need to go out of district. And as Bill had mentioned, some of the staffing at special ed at middle school and high school in particular will help us maintain students in the district as well. So that's important.
Ray, can I just pause you there? I think it's
Sure.
an important moment to realize. So the total push ahead variance. So this is money that we have to raise, but we're sort of a pass through for contractual obligations or statutory obligations that we already have to pay for. We're not reaping any specific benefit for it. We're not deciding on it in the moment.
No.
So we had, the start of this year's budget, we had $3 million of push ahead variance. Our allowable tax levy amount
1.7 million.
was 1.7 million. So I really want to point out that the most that we could raise with a tax levy without having to go to an override was $1.7 million. And when you and the admins and your staff started, you had a $3 million push ahead before anything else.
Right, and that was also related to anticipated, like some changes in special ed that would have required, and that was envisioning the same staffing levels in all the departments and all the rest. So yes, that is in fact where we found ourselves. But again, as an example, some of the things, especially in the middle school, not to get into that, but I think the lack of having a reading specialist, and we find a lot of our students have left in the middle school because of that. So those investments are also purposeful, hoping we can maintain more students in district, which is not the reason, but quite frankly, it's more efficient because a bus for one student potentially to go to district is over $100,000. So it's important. We want to keep our students in district, but there's also, fiscal realities of when students go out of district too that are more expensive if we don't build the programming for the students here. So but that's kind of factored in that $3 million, and we'll get more into the detail once we go over special ed. This is, again, the budget overview. It speaks to what you just spoke about, Alex. We find ourselves at a budget to budget of $2.6 million, and that's with all the ins and outs, the additions, the reductions. As you can see, we closed the revenue gaps by, there were a few things that were working in our favor, one of which is, as I mentioned, the increase that we're anticipating in state aid or a maintenance and or a little addition of that, which again is significant. It's almost $500,000 that had there been any change to that, we would find ourselves needing to make up reductions to address that as well. We're also been fortunate that our interest income and tuition income and some of those other related incomes are increasing, and we're projecting that next year. And there's also some small modifications to transfers out of reserves. We're recommending, well, not recommending, we're required to reduce our appropriated fund balance based upon just kind of where we see ourselves at the end of this year, but we are increasing transfers out of the capital reserve as well as the tax tertiary. Okay. Now again, I'm not going to walk through this. We've put this in the slide deck the last few years, and it's really just for informational purposes. All schools participate in providing data to what is called the Negotiations Clearinghouse that is collected for Westchester, Putnam, and Rockland schools. They then, they take like your ST3 data, your budgets, and actual expenditures and FTEs, and they do a comparative analysis against all other school districts that report all their information in. And by doing so, it gives you a sense of how, as we look at our budget, so as an example, and I'll just call out the first one or two, and then the remainder people can read for themselves. But as a percentage of the budget, many districts, it shows you that most of the monies are going into the teaching and the instructional staff. That means that as a percentage of our total spending, not our total dollar spending, but as a percentage of our total budget, more of our dollars go to these areas than, say, administration or buildings and grounds or or transportation. So it looks at it as a percentage of your total, so it's a good comparison to have. And you can see that we rank 5th out of 33 districts in prioritizing our spending in the teaching and instructional, and actually second in the instructional spending.
Can I point out, if I can jump in for 2 seconds?
Sure.
You know, one of the sort of, for lack of a better word, sort of myths that keeps coming up is that we have so many administrators, and when we've made shifts, like in this case, Dr. McCarthy mentioned Jeannie Ferruggio's coming in to an assistant PPS role. That's taking the place of a pre-existing SPED role. It's not an addition to.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of those things that I'm really glad you brought these numbers up, because for those of us who work with you guys, you know, I say to my friends, it's like this district is very lean, and it's like an off Broadway play where there's like 4 actors that play 16 roles, because that's really what it is here. It is a 4 or 5, you know, in principals, it's a very small team that switches hats constantly. So I'm glad that, you know, if you look at these numbers, they look good, but that's really the sort of context behind it. So thank you for bringing that.
You're welcome. And again, I think it's a good thing for us to look at these different types of comparisons and see how we line up, because I think it helps us understand our total spending as well. Okay, so the revenue. Again, this is just a greater breakdown of what we call other revenues, and I'll just mention them here. So that the various, other than taxes and state aid that we receive, we have some small custodial fees that we receive when outside groups use our buildings, and that's typically really to pay the overtime cost and for these groups to use them. And as you know, we support a lot of after-school programs, a lot of recreational programs, and all the rest. So that's just really money that offsets expenses, quite frankly. We have day school tuition from both parents who parentally place their students in district, as well as next year I think we're anticipating just one district that is going to send us one of their students, and you'll see there the dollars that we collect there. Interest income has been great the last 3 or 4 years. 5 years ago, next year we're anticipating $500,000. 4 or 5 years ago it was $30,000, right? So the increase in the rate of interest income has been helpful to us in terms of offsets to offset the budget expenses. And then again, the other items are that small amount of solar rental we receive from the solars on our roof, some fees, emissions from theater, borderline properties. That represents students that are either in Dobbs Ferry or Yonkers that homes are bordering both, and those particular municipalities have to pay us back money. Unclassified revenues are typically insurance, claims, and/or refunds from BOCES that we receive, sales tax, portion of the county sales tax. And again, just in case some folks don't know what those different categories mean. Again, we're showing that increase of the state aid and the transfers from fund balance, and that is how we were able to balance our budget with 1.7 million of the total 2.6 coming from the taxes, and then the remainder being funded by both state aid primarily and those other areas. So again, just highlights in what we had some increases in those categories. Bill spoke about it earlier. This is the tax cap calculation. This is the calculation that everyone is required to use. And basically, the long and short of it is there's 2 factors. There's the CPI increase, which for the last few years has been 2%, and there are years in which it's less than 2%, meaning if CPI is less than 2%, then that would actually make our tax cap lower. And then we have an individual growth factor that we receive from the Office of Real Property Services from the state, and they determine that by the real brick and mortar growth in the village, and that is by using those two factors and adding in and taking out pilots as we're required to do so, that calculation allowed us to have a 3.66% tax cap this year, which was, I believe, slightly lower than any of our Rivertown neighbors. Again, these are things that are not unique to Hastings, but are a challenge for us in Westchester County, because part of the state aid funding, although we're happy to see what we're getting now, because for many years we got far less than that, the problem has always been that the way they, what they use to calculate the amount of state aid districts receive is based on real property, property value and income. And although that does somewhat seem fair, but they don't factor in the cost, the regional cost of doing business in Westchester County. So I say that the state does not recognize that as part of their calculation, and that's been a long frustration for most of the districts in Westchester, because including Mount Vernon and Yonkers, who also are penalized by those factors because they have high property wealth. I say that to say upstate districts, many of which are getting over 50% of their budgets funded by state aid, and for districts down here, it's typically 12 or less percentage of it. So again, this has been a challenge. The state views Westchester as affluent, and therefore we're not prioritizing the state budget typically. Again, this is just a, sorry, yep.
Could you just explain what foundation aid is?
Sure, so that's our primary source of state aid that we receive. And did I have the foundation aid? Yes. So the majority of our state aid that we receive is what is considered foundation aid. And then there are a few other, and that includes like some expenditure-driven aids, but mostly it is a calculation. We receive a particular dollar amount for each student we have in the district, and they do a calculation on that. But the way I was saying that, the way that calculation is done is based, considers us a very wealthy district, and therefore that's why districts like ourselves don't get that much in the foundation aid. We get more than, we're happy with what we receive, but, again, the majority of the schools in Westchester are funded primarily by the taxpayers in their districts, and I said, even including some of the less, districts I think we understand are less, have more challenges and more funding needs. Even in those places, they're not getting funded that. I think Yonkers, the big four upstate are getting, some of them are like 70 or 80% in like Syracuse of their budget is funded by the state, and then the remainder by the tax dollars. So it's just important because it just demonstrates that although we're happy to get what we receive, it's still a very small piece of our funding. You're welcome. This again is just the overall chart, and it shows all of our grades ungraded through 12th grade, and it shows you that we are anticipating pretty much a flat enrollment for next year. Really from 22 to 23 to today, we've been kind of seeing almost across the board a relatively flat enrollment in all of our schools. And again, that's just charted out. Okay, curriculum. So now we're just going to break down very quickly, and if there's questions, I'll answer them, but these are similar to what we did last time. It just shows the function area. I'll explain what is covered in that area, and then I'll highlight any variances that there may be in those particular areas. So under instructional budget, curriculum development office, which is the office of the assistant super of C&I, and the instructional support that is in that office. And again, the increase there on the instructional support line, it really has to do with we had to change, that it wasn't fully filled last year, so this represents a person being there for the full 12 months this year. We didn't have a full 12-month secretary this particular year that we brought them in. Again, so that's just not so much a big raise for the person, but rather an adjustment of how long the time they'll be in there next year.
Maureen, can I jump in there just
Sure,
a little more texture? So on the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum Instruction, I think one thing people have to realize is the level of state compliance that the school district has to go through. Is there any way you could characterize how much, like what that burden looks like, from the admin perspective? Because it's,
Well, I could speak to some, would probably be better.
It might be easier,
Yeah.
so certain people have to speak for themselves.
Of course.
I would estimate that the assistant supervisor of CNI spends probably about 30% of their time on compliance issues. And we also, at this point, as a few new administrators joining us, note that we fly without any HR professional. We fly with a wonderful support coordinator who's out right now, does immense work, but any of the significant HR issues, and you're going to have them, human resource, you're going to have them whenever you've got a district or any organization, that's handled there. On the academic side of the house by the assistant super, on the other side of the house by the business official. I am the ultimate referee, and then it may go up to higher levels. But right there is quite, I've never worked in a district, and Weston, sorry, I got to speak, 2,300 students, full-time director of human resources, who was also an attorney in the state of Connecticut. So not that much bigger district, the kind of capacity we had. So go full circle, probably about 30% of the time is on compliance. And some weeks it can be 60, 70%. Final comment, we work in the Empire State, and we get a feel of that in public ed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Also,
Sorry.
I'll add, we are a district that doesn't have a director of technology, and so there is also a compliance piece with that, but there is instructional technology oversight. In this role, also serves as the data privacy and security officer, so everything related to education law 2D, anything related to data privacy and security, protecting our students' information fiercely, that's all in that compliance realm as well. And also grant writing. So our title grants and our consolidated application to get funding for the district, you have to apply for that funding, and that needs to be submitted. I would also include that under the compliance umbrella.
Thank you very much.
I forgot about the
Sorry.
the technology, yeah.
And title officer, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go to supervision now. This functional area covers the salaries for our 3 principals and our 3 assistant principals, as well as their secretarial support in their offices. Just as a reminder, we did take a reduction this past year in staffing there within our secretarial staffing. So just as a reminder that we made a bunch of modifications last year on support staff in our last year's budget, and this was an area where the middle school actually reduced their support staff by at least half time. But there's, other than contractual increases here, that's what we anticipate to be the increases. Instruction, this is again the salaries for our gen ed teachers, not special ed or psychologists or other folks that are covered under this functional area. You'll see, I'll just highlight where we see some reds on the screen. The substitutes, we're hoping that next year and we're able to bring that cost down, although the last few years we have been running a bit higher. Some of that is related to a lot of professional development that goes on during the school day. So just kind of thinking of ways to either do some of that in the summer on superintendent's conference days to kind of tighten up the need to have that level of substitutes come to the district, coupled with maybe modifying the amount of permanent subs that we currently have in the district, so that we anticipate having some savings there. And the leave replacements, again, the last 2 years, we've been, and this is when a staff member is out and they're being paid because they have sick time, so we're paying them, but this is where they're like a 4-month or 5-month replacement would be paid out of. There's, I'm being hopeful that the last couple of years are going to be the way next year goes. This is an area in which could be 400,000, could be 200,000, could be 50,000. But being the last couple of years, we've been tracking on a little bit lower than the 190 the last 2 years. We're making the recommendation to bring that down a bit. And then again, we're reducing furniture, and you'll see the other items are relatively some small changes. But within this area, when we speak to some of these shifts in staffing, those individuals are covered under this functional code. So as Bill had mentioned, there's a couple of things going on there. We have We have some retirements, right? So the retirees that will be replaced, we anticipate budget savings in there too. So that's also factored in. So as Bill had said, retirement centers are done for this purpose. So they're not done just to give, to provide people, they're done in the understanding that the district will then get some salary savings with the replacements of those folks. So although it's not, each one is not it's not a huge dollar amount, but if, that is factored into our budget here, that we, on the replacements of those teaching staff, we might have about 30,000 or 35,000 of savings for each of those. And then again, a reminder, we are recommending that 2.0 K6 teacher increase, middle school 1.0 MTSS, 1.0 total science for both middle school and high school increase, 1.0 teaching assistant for the testing center, and reduction of total 0.8 PE district-wide, reduction of 1.0 math at the high school, and then those net numbers of 0.4 social studies high school, 0.4 English high school. And, the next, is that the MTSS? Okay, yeah. Again, the MTSS slide shows that currently there's about 50 students that would be eligible for this, that currently there is no ELA MTSS in the middle school. Okay, so the next thing, again, this is just some data and some numbers for folks that may be saying, well, how many students need testing accommodations, right? So, and here on another slide, I have some of the students with the IEPs. My understanding is that most students with IEPs do have testing accommodations. In addition to that, most of the students with the 504s have testing accommodations. So if you look at the number combined, or, a few hundred students will benefit from this being established. And we have had like quasi testing center in the past, and it's typically funded either staff, that's the word, staffed by individuals that, special ed aid that either had a period or two or substitute, but this way it's consistent and you have a person there. And if, in speaking to Scott, if in the beginning of the year, or if there's a period or two where that individual is not needed, they would be pushing into MTSS at the middle school to assist with that. Okay. This next area is really just the expenditures related to contractual expenses, supply expenses, and textbook expenses related to the area of teaching. And you can see there's some modifications we made. As an example, we no longer working with a consultant for the portrait of the Hastings learners, so we had a reduction there. And there's most areas here are showing reductions or flat budgets. We did have a child that was attending a charter school out of district that now came back to district, so we were able to take that reduction as well. Okay. This area of BOCES, you'll see BOCES are us spending money with BOCES in different areas of the budget. And again, the way things have to be grouped and categorized are based on state required expenditure codes that we're required to use. So under the area of professional learning and eSchool data, which is the student management system that we use for our students here, all of those related expenses, anything that we purchase that service through BOCES is reflected here under this area of the budget. As you can see, there's a slight reduction of about $7,000. One of the items, and when I get to technology, I'll just remind you of it, when we purchase services through BOCES, we do receive about 54 to 55% reimbursement the following year. As an example, this current school year, we received state aid of $1.2 million of BOCES state aid related to the $2.5 million we spent last year. There's a few things that sometimes they'll exclude expenses, meaning like they have caps on certain aspects of their expenses, but it behooves us. So if you really think about these particular numbers, next year we'll get back about $125,000 of that expenditure in this area. These are just areas in which are going to be continued next year. The inquiry work for ELA at the middle school. Hillside is now off of the cycle, fine and performing arts, and then the implementation work. And you can see the 4 areas there that the curriculum assistant director of curriculum or assistant superintendent will continue to work on. Okay, special education. This is, again, a lot of what we were talking about. And as you look at the numbers, and you have to understand there's a couple of things. So there's budget to budget, there's estimated end of year to budget, right? So sometimes you may say, well, that doesn't seem like it's growing by a lot of money, but we have to, it's also sometimes compared to where we ended up currently this year on our estimated end of year. With all that being said, and we'll highlight again the increases of teaching staff here in this particular area of the budget. But one of the items I just want to draw out is line 3, which I don't know if you could read it, but this current school year, when the budget was presented last year, we had anticipated, or the special education department at that time had projected, that we were going to have a reduction of 3 teacher aide positions. Well, what happened after the budget was adopted? There were additional meetings, new students came into the district. We ended up replacing, not laying off 1 person, having all 5 and then adding like 3 more. So it was an 8 FTE swing just in teacher aides. Now, they are obviously teacher aides make far less, but there are still benefits that individuals receive and all the rest. So you can see this particular line item is not even anticipating additional staffing. We just know that everyone that we hired this year we need to keep, and that line needed to change close to $200,000 well, and that also has contractual increases for folks that are in that area. And if anything, there may be potential that number may increase, because again, there's many meetings. They typically don't do the meetings for kindergarten or first grade till this time of year. So before this budget is adopted, we may need to make some if we have to make modifications, we're going to make modifications elsewhere if we need to hire staff that's IEP driven. So again, just as this an area of the budget that 1 or 2 changes have significant impact, and that has to be managed throughout the budget. And I think I had mentioned earlier that this does still plan. Initially, I think there was a plan potentially there was a potential shift of students that are in district out of district placements. Currently, this budget reflects 3 students that they believe that's meaning the district places them out of district at different placements. So the increases are reflected here in the tuition costs of BOCES, as well as it's either BOCES or it's a non-BOCES program. So you'll see that reflected here. And earlier when we went over the transportation budget, I reflected an increase of like 1.5 buses, because sometimes we share. I'm trying to be optimistic that in the final, we'll be able to operationalize that, because there's 3 students going out of district. That usually means potentially 3 new buses. But
Potentially what?
3 buses, depending on where they go, so.
Can we pause for a moment there?
Of course.
Because there's a lot of stuff wrapped up in here, and I think we don't tease out a couple of points. Number one, we mentioned in an earlier meeting, this is not unique to Hastings, but when people say, 20 years ago, things we did it this way and we didn't have these expenses, the classification rate for special education 504 IEP in this district is over 20%, and that's the standard really around not only Westchester, but even reaching up into New York State. The model and the goals have absolutely changed. If you go back 20 years ago, that rate was in half, 10%. And I think that it's important for people to realize, again, that the model and the goals have changed around special education and the supports. And why? Because we see that it works for children and it works for families. And besides that, it is our legal obligation as a public school district to support that. One of the things that comes up a lot is we talk about it, it's an out-of-district placement or keeping a student in district. Besides the obvious benefits of a family being able to have their child attend school where they live, as you said very quickly before, but a single bus run can potentially...
With an aide could be $100,000.
Can cost about...
It's about
$100,000, right? And so we're not talking about the bond tonight, but when we talk about building physical capacity in the buildings, and especially physical capacity to let service capacity increase also, that's a portion of what we're talking about. That it is a huge efficiency, even just fiscally, to have as many children as possible within the schools, and leaving aside completely the sort of ethical and moral benefit to the families and to the community. So I just want to, behind these numbers, that's the stuff that narrative we think about.
Right.
Thank you.
And again, if there's any change, I think initially there was some consideration, some additional, to your point, and then going back and saying if we increase, you know, like as an example today, I'll just use one example. Laura was saying, you know, we're within these numbers, because they're kind of baked in there, right, in programs, like we're also going to expand the life skills class, or, you know, we need to have a section of that to, because in order to maintain children, but a lot of them, their parents want them to stay here anyway, but even financially, it is more prudent. I mean, even if that were not, that should not be the reason, but there is like a benefit that even though we had to increase staff, if they went out of district, these numbers would be a lot higher, you know? So I say that to be, although we're making increases in special ed, it arguably is a much more efficient way to do it. So again, that is here, and as you know, until you adopt the budget, there could be modifications here, because it's gonna be based on student needs and things that may change between now and the adoption of the budget. But, I mean, as far as reduction of aides, I was told that is not, there will be no one that is anyone who's going to drop an aide, so if anything could potentially increase, just as an example of one area. And again, just to highlight these changes of the staffing. And some of them too are based upon like shifts from the middle school with their special ed. Some of those folks have to come into the high school. So there's some like shifts within these numbers as well. But in terms of what the dollars here, you know, and what the adds to the budget, it really is about 1.0 more or less FTE increase in special ed overall, and then of course the shift in the TA and things like that. So we were able to kind of make a lot of things work by making some modifications at Hillside and being able to use that FTE to bring it up to the middle school, high school. Yeah. These are just a list. And the reason you provide this is because if you look at you don't have to go back, but on the previous slide, there's a contractual services line item for special education. And, you know, you may say, well, that's $700,000. That seems pretty large. This is just an example of things in which, well, transportation is covered in another area, but these are all different types of other types of services that we contract for outside of our own staffing. Because even with some of the evaluations, they have to be done by external folks. We contract out completely OT, ABA services. We don't have in-house folks who do that. But just as an example, some of those services could be $250,000 a year plus. Like, I'm saying for everyone, of course. If they're servicing a lot of children, I'm thinking more on the OT. So some of those contracts are quite, you know, significant. In addition to that, just as I mentioned here, you'll see Hudson Lab, and you may say, well, why, for some people may not understand why that's on here. We're in the school of, is it residents, or there was a change a few years back that any private school that's in the domain of the public school district were then required to provide services to the children that are there that may have it. Now, when they're out of district, it's okay because we can bill back some of those districts for it, but when they're students in the own district, we do have to then contract additional staff. It just makes it a little bit more difficult to service the children because they're out of, you know, we can't do it within a group setting the way we would do here. So there is a cost to us in that, and it's just, again, just not so much just to call it out, but in addition to the meetings that are then required by our staff to run, even for out-of-district students. So there are different costs that are in this special ed budget we have to consider. These are the ICT sections. Bill had set it up front, and you know, many years ago, for you who have been around for a while, there was a time where there was only one ICT section run at every grade level at Hillside. And to Alex's point, we are seeing larger, or there's definitely a higher classification rate as well. But in addition to that, there's a commitment that you know, to kind of try to keep the ICT sections, especially K-5, not going up to the legal ability of 12 per, you know, we split at a much lower level. And then there's some slight proposed changes that a special ed at Farragut Middle School, mostly due to the need to increase the earth science change in 8th grade is due to the new earth science regions, correct?
Yes.
Want to speak
So
to that? Yeah.
just briefly, there are some changes, and districts around us are grappling whether to offer earth science for all and to continue doing that. If they were doing that in 8th grade, we want to be bold in alignment with the portrait. We want to make sure that we are keeping our bar very high. We're also very cognizant that it will be a much more complex text. It will be a much more language-heavy text. We are building in some additional supports.
Right, so had we not made that, like, between the gen ed is a 0.6 to support that, and then there's about a potentially either between a 0.1 to a 0.3 special ed services then needed also to accompany that special education, the earth science change in 8th grade, because we only have that offering, we don't have a science aid. Then as we get into the high school, one of the increases here is currently, the projections for next year, there was initially some consideration of just running 2 ICT sections of English at 9th and 10th grade. But again, the numbers are actually lower than, say, the elementary, but the impact at the high school level, they felt it was important to have open a 3rd section at both 9th and 10th grade level, which again was an increase in FTEs that arguably we could have taken as a reduction, but just with the numbers of students in there and the supports, that's going to be, that's in the recommended budget to support that, as well as what we spoke about earlier, the math and science supports for students in 10th grade and up, but that's a consultant teacher model. English language learners, okay. So this one actually changed, we started this year with a budget of $310,000, and we have 3 staff members in that department that were working directly with students. Once we started the new school year, it was about September, October, so we had some new students who came into our system. We then had to authorize hiring of 2 new teachers in this department. So this year we're up to about, I think, about 5.2 teachers to address the ELL support for our current students, and when we started this budget process, we anticipated that level of staffing to need to continue. After a lot of work by Melissa and the principals and Janice and working together, they were able to find a way to schedule it next year, as an example, to actually now not have to have this go back to like 3.3 or 3.4 staffing in this instead of the 5.2 we're currently at. That was important because that's an example of where, had that not been able to be figured out, we would have had to make further reductions. And again, it's an area in which if we get new students into the system, it likely will probably happen after the budget's adopted, but these are areas in which when things like that happen, we do need the ability, or sometimes we have to go to fund balance or whatever the case may be if we had to hire a staff member because we're required to do so, as we did this year. So again, we're a little, we're making it work, but it's a little tighter than we would like to be in this area, quite frankly, because it doesn't allow for, any new student to enter the system, quite frankly. Unless they're at the same level as another student, right, Melissa? Okay, yeah. So again, just to be very cautious here, like we're putting this forward, but if we do have any new students enter, there may need to be some adjustments. So you can see your instructional media. You can go to the next one. Thank you. Next one. This is the area of the budget. It is for the librarians, and at Hillside, the ILC, which is the
Innovative Learning.
Yes, Innovative Learning Commons. And that is for the 2 staff members, the 2 teachers that oversee those 2 areas, one here and one in Farragut. And there's also support staff that is both aides and some monitors that also help cover it. We also do leave our library open at Farragut Middle School till 5 o'clock every night, so that's all factored in here. We would like to continue to do that. And then everything else you'll see is just some slight reductions in some of those supply categories. Instructional technology, again, a large component of our budget, and you'll see some additions, you'll see some reductions, and basically there's some shifting around of expenses that of either, like we're reducing in one area some contractual services, but then at the BOCES end, we're increasing some contractual services there. But really, a lot of this is not a change in service, it's just then, you know, how we're addressing it. Currently, obviously, technology, as Melissa had mentioned, we do not have, like most districts have a director of technology, we do not have a director of technology. Both Melissa and I split the responsibilities and oversight. But within this category, we do have folks, we have a few people who work for the district that are here this evening that work in that category that are you know, they go and they oversee all the like meaning the help desk for the entire district. So the positions that are budgeted in there are more people who are helping end users, and then we have a data person that is in that instructional category, and you'll see an increase there. And that's really related to some shifts in how we staff the break-fix folks. So the entire category, there's not much of a change, mostly just driven on contractual increases. This is the next one, school counseling office, and there is no, oh yes, there is a change here. So earlier I had mentioned that with the retirement of a long-serving support person in the guidance office, we had initially thought that this year we would change or share a staff member with special education with school counseling, and it had been structured like that for prior to the other person having the position, and that was the plan going into this budget cycle. But for a variety of reasons, as that time neared, they were finding it wasn't working. We weren't properly supporting the high school counseling office, resulting in the guidance counselors, you know, not having, maybe taking time to do clerical tasks, which in fact a clerical person should do. So again, this was a high priority to reinstate this position. So you'll see the dollars in this category increase. Health, this is the nursing, this is our school nurses, and I've covered this before. We do have, I know because it's such a few students, there are students in general that could be, they're medically fragile, and their IEP, there are students that have one-to-one RNs that are assigned to them all day because of their medical, and it's, I mean, obviously they're extreme, so this budget reflects the need for that with students that need that type of service. So there's an increase there to cover those nursing services. Psychologists, again, this is all of our school psychologists, 7 psychologists in the district, and you can see it's just the amount reflected there is what we anticipate contractual increases to be. Co-curricular, this is all of our clubs, our theater, our extracurricular music programs, chaperones for all of our events, and you know, any type of supervision that's needed, any type of co-curricular, whether it be you know, chaperones at theater events, chaperones that are needed for, as they talked about earlier, there's a Hillside musical, we need to have aides there, and all the expenses related to supporting, whether it be for our special education students to participate in this and the supports they would need in terms of salaries of their aides to accompany them, that's all reflected in that number. But again, as Bill said, it's continues to support clubs, theater at all 3 schools with no reductions. Interscholastic sports, the only real change here, there's some small tweaks in different categories here, but this does reflect the inclusion of a ski team. And it was about $10,000 of additional funding that's recommended here. It's a cost share model. I believe there's 10 to 12 students that are involved, but as we did the analysis of costs per student spending in sports, at $10,000, it is less than we spend on some of our other sports, like swimming and things like that. That can be quite expensive depending on how many children participate.
Can I just pause a second? I know we're not talking about transportation. That's the last budget.
Oh, but yeah, I could talk about that.
Because with athletics, one of the things, you know, again, we're not talking about the bond tonight in depth, but one of the things that's been an issue has been field availability, and that we have to reschedule games, that we have to transport teams elsewhere. If I'm not incorrect, the extra charge, let's say 2 years ago, the extra busing that we had to pay for because of moved games was something like $30,000 or $40,000. Would that be accurate?
Well, I have to go over the net cost with Drew, but I know he did speak to that about even particular section games having to be, moved, or times having to move the students over. I would say that typically like one bus run for a game could be about, depending on where the location is, it could be like $1,000 round trip. So to your point with the bus saying, and this was part, although it's not, again, it's required to be reported under transportation legally, there, in addition to our athletics budget, there's about $300,000 of athletic transportation that we also spend money on to support athletics that is not reflected in this budget. But we've seen that number has gone up significantly, and there's the cost of the contract has gone up significantly. But then, in addition, when they've either things that would have been here and they've had to been shifted. So if that would happen, I'm just saying, just using that number 10, 20, 30, depending on how many times it occurred, whether for practices or games, you can kind of calculate roughly. Some trips are shorter, but again, you're paying for distance, but you're also paying for the hours you need a bus. So even if it's in Irvington, if the bus has got to stay there for 3 hours, you're paying for 3 hours. They're not saying, oh, it's shorter. There's a two-factor cost, but I'm just saying transportation is extremely expensive. And even, quite frankly, this year when we looked at the athletics, there was some consideration like, okay, we have to be really mindful about like even going to tournaments, because if you want to add anything, and we're like, oh, it's that, and the officials, that's another line item. Although last year we took a big jump in that, all the officials, maybe this seems insignificant, that the refs for all the games, for many years, I guess for 10 years or plus, they hadn't received an increase through however they negotiated with BOCES. Last year, they got a significant increase. So, now we're kind of like, well, Drew, you have to have less because the cost of having them there is like significantly higher. So now it may seem like let's do more scrimmages, but for all those kind of additional things, transportation officials, there is sometimes an incremental cost you don't necessarily think of beyond the coaching, right? The coaches might be willing to do it, but there could be $1,500 sometimes to do an additional something or other. So transportation in particular, when we went in this year, and we did try to find, some slight modifications, and you'll see it within equipment and supplies, particularly because the transportation budget, we needed to increase it like 50 grand this year. So, there was a piece where we needed some offset. So, it's hard because there's a lot of equipment, as even Drew was sharing with us, the cost of he was going on about the cost of even all the athletic equipment is getting significantly more expensive. Dave, you know this. It's funny how like certain areas, certain things cost more, and that's one of the areas we're seeing a lot of price escalation in equipment related to sports, more so than other. I say that just to say that there will be potentially like not as much money as we would have liked. Arguably, we should have been increasing the supply line to keep kind of, but because of the transportation, we try to balance it. And then Drew, as Bill said, as the athletic director, really wanted to support the ski team. That's, coming from his recommendation. And at the price point, thinking it was equitable based upon everything else, And again, we can talk further about it, but he made some modifications to make that happen too. So I just want to reflect that, some of the reductions he took in some of the other areas, instead of increasing budgets, he sort of left things level in order to make room for the inclusion of the ski team.
Yeah, thank you.
But it's hard because you don't see it flushed out in the numbers. And as Bill mentioned earlier, we have very large participation in our athletics, 406 students 7 through 12, and you'll see how they break out. They're broken out by season, and currently we have 55 teams that run each year. And that is it.
Thank you very much, Maureen. So I'm going to open up for questions or comments from trustees.
Sure. Thank you for these in-depth presentations. They were very helpful and informative. I do have a few questions really coming from the perspective of a high school parent. When I get slides 25 and 26 that I would love to go over, and I don't know if we can put them up back on the screen for everyone. When I look at, say, social studies, I guess I have two issues. One, I want to talk about the class size, and two, I want to talk about the electives. And one in terms of class size. I look at the average class size for next year. I see 24. I know for the past 2 years, just anecdotally, like my daughter's had around 27 kids per class. So like how does that bear out if we're talking about not adding another social studies teacher in the future? Just what does that look like, especially because as I was looking at the data here, I did notice that the rising 11th grade class is larger than the current 11th grade class.
Melissa, do you want to?
I'm sorry, I was doing
You
two
get to
things at once.
24. Well, I think in what the recommendation is from Andy, if you look at it, initially we were looking at class sizes, but it looks as though the reductions, especially in social studies currently, will keep the current sections flat, but then currently there was AIS offered in social studies,
25.
which I don't believe, like
25.
things like that would be the reduction, not so much the, oh, sorry.
Which computer is this connected to, so I don't have to connect?
It's the one over there.
So on the bottom really reflects it's a .4 that needs to shift, and what the bottom items on that slide are saying is there's a few ways to get to it. Currently, there's AIS offering of social studies, and that would be, not offered. And I don't think I think typically it's like math and, ELA that usually have AIS. So this one would gain you a .2, and then the remainder would either be, you can see that currently there's 2 sections being offered of AP Euro, Contemporary Politics, and Trial Law. So if you were to either, and those are reflecting like a .1 each, so instead of maybe having 2 run all the time, you'd run 1, in different flip-flops. So the class sizes actually, they're not going to change. I mean, I think there was some like looks to your point of like, could you collapse? Because in other, like in the current, let me see, some of the current, you may have some sections that are higher, but then you have some sections that are significantly lower.
And does that average class size include the class size of electives? Because I know sometimes those are smaller than, say, 10th grade.
No, those are like,
Global.
those are pulling from like, if it's just like 9th grade, social, global,
Like
and then
10th
10th grade.
grade,
Yeah,
global,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay. And then my other question, so when I'm looking at this and reading it to help me understand, I see
Sure.
sociology 15 and psychology 11. Is that students?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And I know we had talked about this, and we had talked about a policy around running electives and saying something like,
Class sizes. Yeah.
if you have 10 or more, it would run. So when I look at this, I'm like, wait, so these both have more than 10, so they would run? Is that how we would understand this?
So it would be the 2 electives with the fewest requests may not run, and that has to do with reallocating some of the FTE and some of the programmatic reduction that Maureen was speaking to earlier. And so this is an estimate of what those numbers look like, but it's 2 examples and basically looking at those different electives, and we would really learn from students and thinking about what is most valued, and then that decision would be made.
That was my next question. So looking towards next year, if you had, for example, this was the enrollment looking into next fall, you would say, oh, we'd run them because they have over 10 kids. There's the demand in terms of.
There would need to be 2 electives not running.
Okay.
And we don't know the exact count yet. In general, what you're saying is, we would want, we would want to run all of our electives, but when we're making the difficult decision, we would take those numbers into account. So it wouldn't be a hard and fast rule that once we hit 10, something would necessarily run.
Okay. Just because I work in the college setting, so we have that kind of sense as well. So it's all enrollment driven. So if we have 10 students to run a class or more likely it will run. But we're saying that while that's a policy we've discussed, it's not set in stone because you have other factors that you're thinking about. Okay. That's helpful. I'm good for this moment. I'll let other people ask questions.
Yeah, so on the topic of electives, so we have core courses, we have advanced courses, and then we have electives. And I guess colloquially we'll say the electives plus the advanced courses are the elective pool because you can choose to take them. That pool across the excuse me, the program of studies is something, going to be 80 courses, something like that, 70 or 80 courses?
Oh, like with all the different,
Right.
yeah.
So just to be clear, we're talking about 2 electives out of a pool of 70 or 80, let's say. And likewise, in any given year, we have things that we don't run everything every single year. And on some things we'll skip a year, give people a chance to take it in a different year, because a lot of the electives can float around. You can take it, there's no prerequisites. So just to put that in perspective, it is a small and sort of common management tool that we use continuously. Is that fair to say? Okay. Thanks, Kevin.
Just in terms of this particular slide, do you have to take psychology in order to take AP psychology?
No, it's not a pipeline course, and so they're 2 separate things. So you are eligible as a student to take AP psychology. Not having had psychology is a prerequisite.
Is there a prerequisite?
That's a good point. It's a good question, actually, because one of the things that the admins have preserved, and something we talked about when we looked at the course load, is that those pipeline things, those prerequisites, those are all in place. So the pathways a student can make through the curriculum are all extant. Nothing's closed off, nothing's pruned off like that. So, thank you.
And that's actually one of the reasons why we wanted to be bold with the earth science for all and maintaining that in 8th grade, because that allows students to have a Regents credit taken care of in the middle school if they meet proficiency. So that opens up future opportunities for additional electives. So regionally, some districts, again, are not going to take that pathway. We want to give it a go. And we've built in extra supports, and we're being very proactive about that because we do feel like it opens pipelines and opportunities for students.
I have another elective question. I have a student that took trial law last year who loved it so much, and I could see her wanting to take more classes, maybe being pre-law when she thinks about college and whatnot. And I know that we have sort of current 10th graders, 11th graders that might have been sort of thinking out a plan for themselves, for their future based on the current offerings. Have we done any work around that to look at like what there might be, what students are anticipating there might be? Just because I think there's a concern that for some students, like they were anticipating something, but it might no longer be there with these cuts. So how do we sort of balance that forward thinking around sort of scope and sequence of their planning, but also our budgetary needs?
So there are a lot of factors that are involved in that, and the state has the portrait of a graduate, and so some of our future planning has to take into account what the state requirements are and what they are looking into. And then in addition, we can look at our previous trends, what students are interested in taking, and then making sure that we're doing our best to do what we were just talking about, preserving those continuous pathways for students, but also looking at some innovative opportunities if we have space for it, if we have the ability to offer it as an elective in a rotation. And that would be done, again, speaking to students and having our counselors are on the front lines, our admin team, and of course our teachers have a very good sense of our students and what their interests are. And we want to make sure that we include their feedback, and we will forward.
We're going to do better in that regard. I mean, we had a slip up this year as it related to advanced AP psychology, and we corrected that. I've talked with the various administrators, and we're not going to let that happen again. But that gets right to your point. So we may have some people out and about who said, okay, thanks for sharing that, but what you kind of dropped the ball this year on AP Psych. We know that, we recognize that, we're going to fix it. And the advantage of a K-12 director of counseling is we're going to be that much better. I mean, Jeanette was great, and although focused on the high school. So, I mean, that's part of this K through 12 systemic thinking that I'm insisting on now. So we have to sort that out. And as difficult as it is to see even a couple of electives on this chart, I think the larger whole is what we got to focus on here. I think that ratio that Alex, you spoke to is really important and powerful. And if we then can fine tune our understanding of who's coming up through the pipeline and their interests, we can anticipate where those 1 or 2 electives we're pulling back on, what those may be. And if they are going to get pulled back on, how we do some good counseling to say, well, you may not get that because it's not there, but how can we guide you?
Right,
We're too small not to be able to do that well.
And I would argue
that's an area we have to get better
yeah,
on.
I would argue that's 8th and 9th. I mean, 7th and 8th grade work even as you're
Right, and
anticipating
see,
for the future.
Right, and I think that's why, if the board will agree to sort of make this K-12 approach and help FMS get to even a higher level. Those are things we can better understand with 130 students and change per grade as we look forward. But again, it's that larger whole relative to several pieces. Anyway, sorry.
I'll just briefly add, I love the question, and Andy Clayman and I have already had some conversations about that and what it looks like in terms of student voice and student choice and having those as values and getting ahead of that before the program of studies is finalized. So we already had some of those conversations, and to the point that was just made, some of that came out of having conversations about AP psychology, getting that back into the mix, and then talking about how we think forward around that. So.
Thank you.
I want to just first start, Bill, by thanking you for your presentation that I think was really quite open and transparent. I think the beginning of an attempt to address some of a lot that's floating around in the community and concerns, legitimate concerns that people have when they hear about things in the budget. And I guess it's hard, and thank you also, Maureen, for everything that you presented and go over and over and over this. It's hard not to get kind of caught up in the weeds with this little thing and this little thing. And I know in terms of the high school, I think, of course, there are lots of concerns about teaching reductions. And I guess my overall hope is that whatever reductions have to be made, obviously, that they are being done in conjunction with faculty, at least the department chairs, to try to come to the best solution if we need to make some of these cuts. It's always hard to make cuts. I'm kind of impressed that we're not making more cuts. And I think there were two things that stood out to me, with many things that stood out, but I just went back to a note that I wrote earlier where there was something about creative writing and reducing sections from 3 to 2, and that would be 54 people. And I just thinking, like, I don't think I'd want to be the creative writing teacher for 28 kids. That's a lot of work.
Right, so I think, I mean, it's a great point, and that's a good example of how we'd look at that. These are listed as examples, and then also, Frank, clarity and transparency is what I insist on. Mm-hmm. And so there it's saying that's an example of the problem we're trying to overcome, knowing that this is still, the vast majority of this high school will be the same and getting better and stronger and adding. And then being very cautious and careful with good planning is what's it mean for a student as it may relate to creative writing or something else, and how do we manage that?
Right, and I think for teachers, I think in different subject areas, the additional work that teachers do at the end of the school day can really vary from department to department.
Right, I mean,
and I think that's something that has to be, considered also.
Yeah, I mean, what goes on for an English teacher who's serious about the quality of writing and bringing that along, that's a heavy lift and a heavy load.
Yep, I think so.
That's understood.
Or
so
social studies, I think, too.
Yeah,
And
wherever there's that heavy writing component and the critique
Right.
and growth about as writers, so yes.
I mean, and I know that there were concerns, at least initially, about reduction in classes, and I think we tried to address it with looking at some of the class size and justifying in difficult times like this when we have to make some cuts. There was one thing that had been brought to my attention, I don't even know where it stands with this, but photography in the art department, that is a very highly valued course that's taught. I'm just putting it out there as something that was brought to my
art is
attention by a
fully
few
as
people.
is. We made the decision to keep art fully as is, and as well as music.
But that's an example, I think, when
Yeah.
you're saying class sizes, where you
Yes.
do see, like, those were trade-offs, right? Like, do you keep the art programs that sometimes have 3, 4, 5 students,
Yeah.
2 students,
Sadly, I don't even know what.
No,
the
but I'm
norm is
saying,
for
so as we talk
photography.
about class sizes, you do have some art sections, quite a few that are sub-10, so I think that's,
I think that's kind of hard to justify in this moment of time.
but I think the idea is that to shift some of that and create other offerings throughout the district, or else then you end up losing like a whole program of study.
Right. No, I hear what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying. I do think that, like, I'm like, it warrants further analysis, right? Like, if we're going to have this sort of policy for English and math,
Because then we
that's
wouldn't have
like
the art,
10
we would have
plus.
caught it if we had that
But,
standard.
but what, I mean, I think it'd be helpful to maybe see those numbers at a more granular level so we understood what it looks like. And I would say also for athletics, right? Like I like these conversations, and it was interesting what you were saying about them having the ski team and the cost of the ski team. And, you know, I'm all for lots of opportunities for students. I know other people have floated to me a bowling team. And I guess one of my questions is like, we are a small district, and how do we carry and manage it all? And I guess sort of if we're going to have a policy around class size, do we also have a policy around sports size, just so there's a level of transparency of like how and why these decisions are made and consistency around it, because I think it can get confusing pretty easily.
Yeah.
I'll just add in terms of art, I've had the pleasure of working with the art department on the inquiry work right now. And everyone's really been rolling up their sleeves, and the focus happens to be the ceramics program, so I'll just use that as an example. So when you're thinking about enrollment in the ceramics program, you're also thinking about the intersection with physical space. I know we're not talking about the bond tonight, but I'm posing this as, you know, a little thought experiment, because if you have 8 ceramics wheels, right, and you have students that want to enroll in ceramics, and you have a program that is working to be creative where some students are doing hand building while others are throwing on the wheel, there's a capacity in terms of how many students can actually enroll in the class because of what they can physically access. They can't have large tubs of glaze stored. They're working around that. So they'll have smaller tubs, and students are painting. But so programmatically, like more.
But ceramics actually have higher numbers than some of the other things too.
Right.
Yeah.
But just in general, like certain programs require space for certain
But like
things.
AP ceramics was one of those that fell into
I mean, I
that.
think,
Not
if
AP
I may, a
ceramics.
takeaway from this conversation with the board is that we've not had a policy on class size per se. We've had guidelines. That is something that, given that larger context I shared at the beginning of my remarks, there are more districts, I'm going to say these high-performing districts, high-choice districts, are looking at that more and more. So the superintendents have been talking about that. So, and it's more guidelines because you need to be flexible. And again, you don't, especially, you know, what's wonderful about this district is that K-1, 2, pretty much after that, they are here. They have dreams, they have anticipations. We don't want to squash those. We want to give those opportunities. So right here we have examples. So, and I'm quite confident that looking ahead, good, careful planning, we will minimize the problems here and we'll maximize this greater sense of opportunity that we're going to create. But part of that might be the board, but this is something the board's going to have to come back to, and I put it on my to-do list, is it time to set a guideline policy as it relates to participation ratios? So you've got your sense of classes in that, then you've got your sense of athletics. There may be more per pupil, a per athlete cost, right? So what's it cost for any individual member of a basketball team relative to any member of a bowling team or something? And then you say that's the guideline, and how do we manage that? Just because anyway. But I've got on the to-do list, it's something for the board to be considering as going forward.
Yeah, and even with like the modified sports, I mean, that's just
Right.
all the things that we do and the intramurals and all the rest that are way beyond some of what our colleagues do in terms of that's more where I think we're an outlier, what we offer in terms of modified sports.
I had a question on reducing the math in the high school by one. It says 1 FTE, but it also kind of talks about, I think, what scheduling kind of efficiency. So could you, it's not a person or a class specifically, right? It's more scheduling efficiencies?
I think the majority of it is in the AIS, area of AIS and the way that's currently scheduled. And again, significantly even with the shift would still be more than is at the other buildings, like in terms of AIS support. So I think dropping either a 0.4 or like offering it 2 periods a day versus 6 or so would gain you half of the reduction. And then the remainder, at least right now, as Melissa said, once it gives examples of if it were currently happening this year, we may not run an elective every semester, but there were 2 electives within the math department that similarly may not be run every semester or may not be run in a particular year. But then to your point, Alex, like sometimes things weren't run in one year, but then they're brought back, like if not a junior, then as a senior or something of that. So I know there were things right there, like AP Stats had 9 students, and then computer programming had 4. So those would be examples of things that would not run.
Got you. And I want to compliment you, Maureen. I mean, you're a master of all the details, and I think you put a lot of work into this, and it shows. So thank you.
Thanks.
I have a question. So AIS in high school is just math?
Math and English.
Math and English. So,
And social studies, I guess, this year.
but it's only the math AIS that's going to be cut?
No,
or
English shall be reduced. It just won't be offered in as many sections
It
as it
won't
currently
be
is.
it won't be offered in 6
Every period,
sections.
right, it would be offered. So
It's-
instead of having maybe 2, you
Yeah,
may go
it's-
to 5 in an AIS.
Right.
We're looking at the ratios there.
Yeah.
Right,
The
right, I
ratio of the
understand.
teacher to the student.
I understand. So, but if it's reduced, and I understand it's because the ratio is, teacher to student is high, but if it's reduced from 6 to 2, then it's really going to change.
But
Well,
it would be
the
similar to
model.
like resource room sizes.
Wait, I think that's a great question. Let me suggest, let us come back and give you some averages, because that 6 to 2 may be masking that the number of students shifting may not be that great, because you may have some sections where they're very small. I mean,
Right.
overarching, it's 5 students, so it's not then bringing that up to 20, 25, 30 in an AIS. So I think we, as a let me just make the most obvious of points. As I said in the beginning, this is the start of a several-week conversation with the board.
Right.
And it's quite standard. These are great questions I'm scribbling away. So I think we owe it to come back to clarify what that means in terms of numbers of students.
So I would just like to say, which I'm sure you've thought about, but I'm thinking about it as I sit here. The 8th grade cohort that's going into high school next year didn't have a robust MTSS support system in place at FMS, right? That's been acknowledged. That's why we see the focus and the addition of those happening. So there's going to be a cohort of children moving up who didn't get adequate support for their needs potentially, who may need more than less in terms of intervention services. Do you know
Right.
Well,
what
I
I
mean,
mean?
just the
Yeah,
current
let
ratio,
me-
we can go over the
Yeah,
current
let me
ratios if you-
jump in. We're going to pay total attention to that.
Yeah.
This isn't just a blunt instrument effort, not at all. It's a great question in the sense that then I think we can begin to say, what do we know about that AIS efficiency move? What does that mean in a sense of number of spots to get that support and attention? And start to get some, we have a couple weeks here, not naming names, get some early indicators on proportionally what's coming up. We're too small not to be able to answer that roughly for you as a board, because there's nothing here that's about a blunt instrument. This is about very nuanced types of things. In fact, one thing I said to all the faculty today, rightly so, you know, I was asked last week, why is this taking this long? Why didn't you figure it out 2 weeks ago? Great question, because blunt instruments were 2 weeks ago. Fine-tuned analysis of what's the best way to do this so we serve our children and our students, that's what we're doing here, right up to 1 o'clock today. Understanding adjustments to keep that kind of minimize the negative impact and to be as nuanced, student-centered as possible in these things. So I think, Teresa, these are great questions for us to come back to.
Okay.
One is more clarity on what does this AIS shift mean, and what's our sense of what's coming up the pipeline and what it means, because you're acknowledging, as I've been hearing repeatedly, as great as our middle school efforts have been, they got to get better, because we've got, you know, so that I want to hold on to in this budget that attempt to get it better in the middle
Yes.
school, while then making it clear that we're not doing that to sacrifice the high school and the children there. So again, let's come back with a little more
Okay.
clarity and specifics on that, if that's
Okay.
helpful.
It's helpful, and it's also helpful for us to know that you remember that these kids, you know, maybe fell through a few holes, if that's the right expression, you know, and need to be caught a little bit in this 9th and 10th grade experience.
So we're grateful to have a math interventionist now at the middle school. That is wonderful news. We are working to strengthen our MTSS programming, and I won't echo what Bill just said. We'll make sure that we bring more information. And I will just add that the goal is to provide targeted intervention support so students do not stay in AIS, that we are cycling students through, and we have robust processes in terms of progress monitoring to accelerate learning and close some of those gaps. But we'll get more information.
The expression is fell through the cracks. Some of them fell through the cracks.
Holes, cracks, yeah.
Slipped through the cracks.
Through the cracks, there you go. Can I dovetail with something that you brought up? Because, again, thematically, this comes up a lot. Again, we're not talking about the bond tonight, but, when one of the avenues where people talk poorly about the bond is that we didn't have this 20 years ago, we didn't have this sort of thing. MTSS is an aspirational support, and it's valuable because it works really well for these kids. In the same way that we talk about high school courses as having a pipeline effect, where you take one, then you progress to the other. In some ways, in middle school, we don't have the same pipeline or tracking, but if children don't have support in math, in English, in the other sort of like executive skills, they don't nominate themselves to take those advanced courses when they get older, when they get into the high school system. And so, again, this is a different model of education. Instead of waiting for problems to occur for a child and then either ignoring it or offering them sort of remedial support when it's too late, MTSS at Hillside, at FMS, it is an aspirational kind of support that absolutely works, and it is efficient in that way. And so when we come to the bond and we talk about we need space for these things to occur in, that's something that's not a luxury from our perspective. We are in a very expensive environment in New York State. We can't drive costs down, but we can drive results up with the money that we spend. And that's, for me, a prime example of it. So we'll come back to it, but...
No, I like what you said, Alex. Every time you said aspirational, I'm like, no, it can't be. It has to be what we do. And it has to be part of our
I don't mean
culture.
aspirational for
No,
us.
I know,
right.
but we have some of it, but we have to do better, K through 12. Wait, I have another question, but I want to make sure this is...
That's closed. You asked your question.
No, you go, because I've asked more,
Okay. Okay. So I saw in the budget that the BOCES, I know you spoke to this and I didn't grasp it. There's a 59% increase in spending in the BOCES line.
Not
Which one?
59%, which one?
I think.
Oh, I'm sorry, reimbursement. What I was saying is that, as we look at, say, areas of the budget
Oh,
where you'll
that's a
see BOCES. We get the
reimbursement?
money back. So as an example, this
Oh,
year,
oh.
we spent roughly $2.5 million,
Got it.
including, the only thing that doesn't receive that reimbursement is students that go there for special education, because that's excess cost aid filing, which actually is a lower percentage. But
Don't worry.
it's actually helpful. It's a less expensive way for us to
Right,
run
got
these
it.
things.
How many students use the BOCES program?
Well, now you're talking about the career and technical program?
Yes.
Okay, so there are, what we typically budget is in two categories. There's the children that are non-IEP students, and typically we have 4 slots for those children offered each year, again, based on interest that the guidance counselors are seeing, and then also just because, we do have to limit the amount of, offerings to that. And then on the special ed side of things, I believe we either have 10 or 12 students that we schedule for. Part of it is a graduation requirement for some of those students, so that's why
Got it.
that's captured under the special ed. And then again, there is a busing component to support that.
And in the HASP program, I noticed it said that in social studies, the classes are 5.
We're yeah.
So how many students are, I mean, I only want you to touch the HAS program to make it better. So I'm not asking these questions in any other way. How many students are in the HAS program?
I think it depends on grade level. Sometimes, I don't know, maybe 20 total,
20 across 3 grades?
4 grades.
Yeah, we'll
It
we'll
may
get
be
you
a
the
different
exact-
number. I mean, we have to get the
We'll-
exact
we'll
number.
get
I'm
you the
trying to
exact
look
numbers.
through the schedule.
Yeah, we'll get you the exact numbers.
And the slide where you have the number of students with IEPs, it didn't have the numbers.
I needed to, Laura,
Yeah,
that never got filled
Okay.
in, so I'll put that in.
In terms
I
of
think
the
it's like 300.
the accommodations for testing, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I
Yeah, it
think
was
the
just to
state.
support that.
the
yeah.
s-
Oh,
yeah,
was it only for testing accommodations?
Yes. that
Oh,
was what
okay.
that
We were
was.
trying to show
Okay.
that like 400 students have testing accommodations.
Right.
Primarily at middle school and high
Right.
school.
Got it. Thank you.
Welcome.
Questions?
I have one more. I'm just trying to, looking at the elective piece. And I see like AP Euro and AP Statistics, right, as ones that could possibly not run. And I know I'm all about building up guidelines and whatnot, but I'm also cognizant that for students thinking about college and competitive colleges, they look at how challenging the curriculum is that the students have taken. And if we're not offering courses or they're reduced and students, they're on the course plan, but students can't access them, could this be a potential issue for our rising juniors,
Yeah,
seniors?
so, I mean,
And how do we
yeah.
make sense of that?
So, I mean, again, this is not a broad scale across the high school situation. We're looking at this in a very focused way to figure out how to address this, and looking then at the statement that goes out to colleges as to what there is, we would do that. So it's a sequence. Are we giving quality counseling to students for what are their best choices relative to where they want to be? We can do better in Hastings. Let me be direct in this public room. We can do better on that. That's part 1. Part 2 then is matching then what are the offerings, where are we seeing some issues that may relate to questions of the class size and all the rest and the offerings, and look at that. And then determining on where that particular student is, how do we have that statement that's going out to the colleges be clearer and stronger? That's also where we can get better. These are 3 points I've heard repeatedly for 4 years since being here. And my whole career is only in high productive high schools, or at the receiving end, or at the work trying to get urban ed in the Midwest through foundations to do better at getting in college. So my personal commitment is to do this right, not broadcast, cut it, but to really zero in. That's what this budget is trying to do, and go after it. And these are great questions to kind of push and probe us to say, all right, well, what does that really mean? So I think part of this coming back with a little more clarity on what that would look like. And again, in terms of the high school, I think it's really trying to understand where might we get some efficiencies in AIS that address both the current high schoolers and the arriving high schoolers. Teresa's really good question. If we get some efficiencies there, that takes pressure down off of this elective issue, right? Because you see we staff in decimal points.
Absolutely.
Right, and it's a
Yeah.
matter of decimal points here as to whether we can still offer 1 or 2 or 3 of these electives that may not be offered. I mean, we're talking about a very small number. And then it's saying, okay, we have to keep HASP going. That HASP graduation every spring is a pinnacle event for what each of those, what matters here is, Peter and Greg right at the mic, but it's what the students say. About what that means, and so how do we do that that much better? We'll tread lightly there, but if that gives us some ways to still have a quality HASP program for what it stands for with a little more efficiency, we're not looking for many decimal points in staff time. I mean, that's where we are. I mean, thoughts of 6 or 7 teachers gone, that's not what this is. I mean, we're literally in the decimal point range to make sure we don't have the elective prime you're talking about. So that's what we have to work on. Again, think scalpel nuance. Don't think broadcast boom, get it done. That is not where we are. So if that's helpful. These are great questions to push and probe us.
Can I bring up something related to like course availability? We didn't get down to a factual look at it. But one of the things we kind of tossed around when we talked over the summer and with the state-driven, the resource sharing plan, I forget what it was called. I'm sorry? Regionalization. This idea, and when we built the bond, when we built the proposal for space usage, one of the things that we looked at was smaller than classroom spaces or even individual sort of modules, right? And part of the background thinking on that was, would it be possible, down the road, that a student could take a class asynchronously online with other students from other districts? Could we build that capacity? And part of the answer was, well, there's work rules around that, and that has to be negotiated. But is there and nothing, we're not talking about next year, but is there anything, that we can sort of point to or coming down the pike, so to speak, that we might be considering those sorts of opportunities?
Alex, that's a cold call that we had.
Sorry.
No, it's a great one, because that we stayed in the regionalism game. Particularly as Catherine knows, given her work, out and about, a lot of consternation. A lot of districts chose not to opt in, and I advised board opt in. And we almost didn't discuss it. To me, it's so obvious for the exact reason you're raising. That if we can find ways to have a Hastings education with these other opportunities, because we're not alone in 1 or 2, 3, 4 courses we want to offer, but we can't fit it in. So I don't want to speak for some of our riverfront districts, but a lot of them stayed in for some of these very same reasons. Some right now held back. Just, the concern about regionalism was it about what's hidden? Are you going to combine us all into one district? Right, that was the fear. And with the foundation formula potentially getting undercut, going away, the fear was money would be swept out of the way, so districts would be forced to go into combined districts, so make up the combinations. But my sense that was not what was there, is sort of these kind of opportunities. So it's not a tomorrow answer, but we committed to be in that discussion. Our Southern Westchester BOCES district super is leading that. We have required participation, so we can keep you updated.
Okay.
And if the board insists, I think it's great to insist, zero in on this sense of how do we bolster our academic, dare I say, intellectual opportunities for our students.
Yeah, I think, absolutely, I agree. I think it's just sort of the obvious next step. All districts in New York State, all of us operate against a very tight fiscal constraint, and that's just the reality. And so it seems the only way that a small district, or even a medium-sized district, has a way to differentiate is by doing things like that. And I think that, especially at that level of age, those kids have the capacity to manage it, So I would love to see that, for sure. Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
I have more of a broad question, and that's that, Bill, you said in your presentation that it's your role to recommend a budget to us as the board, and you also said that you sought input from administrators and that you listened to a variety of different stakeholders, and obviously you have a very intimate and close understanding of the minutia that goes into the financial constraints of the board. So I guess what I want to understand is, to what extent are the recommendations that we see here not something that works backward from what our financial constraints are? So saying we know that we can only add 1 point, whatever it is, and that you then present to building leaders, this is how much we can work within that. Is it that, or is it that the building leaders actually do an in-house analysis of what works, where there are inefficiencies, what scheduling is not working, where things can be tightened? Because I think an underlying current of what makes people nervous is that, say I'm a parent who's in the middle school and I'm looking towards my child's future in the high school. How can you impress upon me that my child isn't going to be at a disadvantage going into a high school now that has a different FTE makeup than maybe my older siblings did?
Well, it's a giant question. I think.
I know. I didn't think it was going to be a one shot.
No, let me sort of speak to it. And again, we're in a several-week discussion with you, so it's bringing sort of nuances. If anything, this is not a broad, blunt instrument move. This is not what's going on in Washington. Let me just say that very clearly. This is a very nuanced focus, is to say, how do we go K-12? How do we, for as hardworking as our middle school staff and faculty are, the through line for me for 4 years is, how do you get the middle school better? How do you get the middle school better? how do you get the middle school better in very tangible ways? And that's built here. That's what's here. So then it's saying, how do you keep Hillside doing what it's doing, which I think we're doing with this budget, and at the high school, how do you keep the high school doing it? We've had retirements, and you see that it's a decimal point FTE shifts. So it's not multiple staff. It's a very tight focus on that shift right down now into 3 particular departments. So it's very focused and understanding within those departments, what's the class size impact? How do we understand that? How do we keep it where it should be? Which right now is at an average. This is right in the acceptable range where we've been. And then saying second, where are those couple or several electives, a couple or several, that may not be offered? And what's the impact of students on that? I think that's why I said at the beginning, that we have to understand that the vast majority of what's going on here will be the same or better. So that middle school parent, the attempt here, depending on larger financial issues that we cannot control. Right? But that's also why it's good. You've insisted stay within cap, be conservative. Some say, well, if federal money goes away. I mentioned Harvard freezing hiring. Stanford's done the same thing. MIT. Right now, tonight, I said half of the Department of Ed has been laid off.
Yes.
Half of 4,400 employees. Boom, gone. Well, our number is $600,000, mostly for special ed. Which
All for staffing.
I'm sorry?
It's 600,000 in staffing paid through federal grants.
Right,
That is
right,
not
but-
in this budget right
Right,
now.
but what I'm saying though is, I'm going to the point that I really do believe that number, that's a safe set of monies. Because it's about particular individual services, I think. So what I'm saying is those larger financial issues we can't control. Other than that, we're trying to build towards assuring families coming up through that other than maybe around the edges, this will be the high school they want, the high school their older siblings, if it's, may have had, and that's our commitment. But I think it's over the next couple of weeks helping you see that through more clarity on the AIS. What does that bring us towards that elective question? Being very gentle and careful around HASP, but what does that bring us in terms of, because HASP is wonderful and also other districts have alternative programs. I worked in Cleveland Heights in Ohio, they had one at Heights High. So there's a way to sort of think about, as great as HASP is, how do we build on that? But doing that over the next week or two, but I think.
I guess part of what I'm asking also is just how do you shed light on the fact that these are suggestions that come from the building leaders themselves who have the day-to-day working knowledge and expertise on the ground to say, this is what makes sense, whether or not you're somebody who's been at Hillside as long as Amy has or somebody who's more recently new to our district, how do parents, how does the school community understand that this isn't like a dictate from the central administration, but
Right.
rather, an actual, authentic
Right.
operation
Yeah,
as a result of oversight.
All right, so I think I'll try to make this really clearly. As superintendent, I own bringing you what's here. I'm nothing without a team. I am nothing without listening. I'm nothing within a very broad way. I also will never say to a faculty, you pick who else should not be on the faculty. It's not, I don't want to put that on a peer employee to say who should or shouldn't be here. I've had that discussion in all of my previous stops. Whereas, at some point, employee to employee, teacher to teacher, faculty member to faculty member, like it or not, that's an administrator role. So that's a piece, but it was not a directive, rather it's a listening to where the leadership is at the building level, at other levels as to what's needed, working then with Maureen from the financial side of it, what works, what doesn't, working with Melissa on that, circling back to principals, circling back to counselors and others, deeply on the special ed side of things, deeply on the athletic side, and then saying, okay, I am going to make some decisions here, pulling that all together and bring that forward. But it's a constant back and forth to get to where we currently are, and then existing questions will also be a back and forth on how does this work out. It'd be very tangible, the AIS question. What does that mean? The MTSS in the middle school, what's that mean? Get input and insights on that. I'm not sure I'm helping at all on that.
No,
your
that's
question.
helpful. I mean, I think, part of it was rooted in just kind of the understanding of scheduling and kind of what that reveals in terms of like, where there are classes that might be
Right.
lopsided
Yeah,
and you have sections with different numbers of students where you have one that's like 27 students, as Catherine has referred to, and you might have a different section of the same class that due to the way that the schedule works has 10.
Yeah.
Like those kinds of things are obviously revealed as we do a deeper dive, and so that's why I asked the question, just to share a kind of a general, insight into the whole process, that's all.
Thank
Well,
you.
Yeah, well, I think the fact, when we went over the class sizes, to your point, like even with our, like there are considerations, right? Like, with the class sizes where in the arts, you're seeing sometimes music and art that had less, but then you would lose a whole program potentially instead of an elective. So I think that there's some choices that were made there.
And I heard your question as a very strong process question. And having been a person involved in the process, what I can say is it's been incredibly iterative. It keeps moving around and around and around and around, and with a thoughtful lens on trying to understand. And you can start with a number, like you mentioned, class size, and then what does that actually look like, and why is it the way it is, and trying to get a deeper understanding of pieces that aren't understood. And that involves conversations with multiple stakeholders. In some cases, it's around grabbing onto innovative opportunities and continuous improvement efforts towards a very clear strategic goal. And in other cases, it might be around what's the least worst decision when we're thinking about impact and realities about, fiduciary responsibilities. So none of it is easy, and all of it is symbiotic from my perspective with people that have been involved in having had those conversations, if that's helpful.
Very much so, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
And as the process goes on, as I mentioned, any changes in funding or anything else, we'll be bringing that. That's not unusual that either there may be some tweaks and things like that prior to the board's adoption of the budget, which again has to be done by next month.
Yeah, I think we adopted the budget on April 22nd. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you all for being patient. Public, we're going to open up.
No, well, we have the update on the flood.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I skipped over. I do need reading glasses, I think.
Should we do public comment first?
No,
sorry?
Facilities update.
I can't quite hear that. We can. It is getting late. I think that would be a nice thing to do. Melissa, is that okay for the schedule thing? So we're going to move public comment up to right now. So you have a list, right? People signed in? Okay, you'll call it out. And please, everyone observe the 3-minute rule. The clerk will time things, so please. Hi, good evening.
Hi, I'm Marit Har. I'm 161 Mount Hope Boulevard. First, thank you. I really appreciate all the detail you've gone into and all the hard work that goes into making a budget like this in this funding environment. I do still have some concerns, picking up on what many of the trustees have said. You've said that the vast majority of the high school will be getting better, but I confess I don't really understand, given what I've seen, how that's true. I see how that's true for FMS, but building on what Teresa said, our kids who are at the high school now went through FMS in its previous iteration, and I think that they are now going to be cheated again. Things that I'm concerned about, class sizes. There was a slide up there about the 9th grade. Next year's 10th grade math classes would be 19. My son's math class this year is 26. That's an honors class with 26 kids. It's very hard to get individual attention in that kind of setting. Obviously goes after school. He does all the things he's supposed to do, but it's a big class. I'm also concerned because these projections all cut off at 25, 26, but as we know, the current 9th grade is very large and the current 11th grade is very small. And once we lose teachers, it's very hard to get those budget lines back. And once we move to the time when the current juniors and seniors have graduated, and those classes are replaced by the much larger 7th and 8th grade, I do not see how any of these projections hold. And I think that average class sizes are going to go way up. That, for this current 9th grade, which is the largest grade in the district, that's gonna hit them when they're going to 11th grade, known to be the hardest year, the one that matters the most for college. I'm afraid of what that will look like. In addition, In addition, with electives, I don't understand how you lose. I see all those .4 and .4, and a 1 in math. I mean, even this wiggle room that you might have with the current junior year, I don't see it in the math department. I don't see wiggle room there, losing a 1.0. But even so, losing 3 teachers, I hear everything you're saying, but on the ground, looking at how the classes are now, losing electives, losing sections of electives, I think it is going to deeply impact how the kinds of classes kids are going to be able to take. I think already sections are, it already is so difficult to fit things that kids want to do into their schedules. I think they're going to get locked out of things that they really want. And I think it's important, as I think Catherine was saying, you know, these are not just fillers once requirements have been met. These are things that are vital to kids to figure out who they are, what they want to study in college, you know, the kind of people they want to be, you know, not being able to take anthropology, not being able to take music theory, because whatever it is, there's only one section, you know, sociology, whatever it is, these may be their only opportunities to take those things and decide if that is something that they want to study. So I think that having multiple sections, you know, it may look like on paper these are small, but having multiple sections is very important for those reasons. You know, finally, I am somebody who very much wants to vote yes on the bond. I think it is really important for our district to be a great in all ways and to support the facilities. But at the high school level, to have great facilities and then diminishing academics does not make any sense to me. People are not going to move here if they think they're going to have the same class sizes that they would in the city and fewer access to upper level electives. So having the great facilities won't matter if we don't also have small class sizes and excellent academics. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, how are you? Kafira Wilderman, 122 Edgar.
You could hold the mic. It just.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I'm too short for the for the mic stand. Hi, thanks for that presentation. I really appreciate all the detail. I have a 10th grader and a 2024 graduate. This is my 13th year with a student in the Hastings schools, and I've been an active member of the PTSA's executive committee for the past decade. But this is my first time ever commenting on a school budget. I'm speaking today because I'm concerned that the decision not to budget for replacements for retiring teachers at Hastings High School in the math, social studies, and English departments is going to have a detrimental impact on programming in the high school. One of the amazing things about Hastings High School is that it allows students the opportunity to explore and find their interests. I acknowledge that there are likely some inefficiencies that can be resolved. However, the class size data that was presented in January in the initial budget presentation and tonight in the form of average class size for each high school grade is not consistent with the lived experience of my own student and of many families I've spoken to. According to the January chart, the 10th grade has 10 sections and average class size is 19 students. My 10th grader has a couple of classes with 19 to 20 students, but also is in a 24 student chemistry class and a 27 student ICT World History class, a class that culminates in a Regents exam. We also must be careful not to overcorrect inefficiencies in a way that makes classes and pathways unavailable to students and detracts from our stated commitments set forth in the Portrait of a Hastings Learner. I'll read a couple of them. One is to inspire exploration and experimentation. Another is unleash natural enthusiasm for learning and growth. And just one more, expand what one sees as possible for themselves, the community, and society. I recognize that we're in a difficult time with uncertainty and rising costs that are outside of our control. However, I ask district leadership and the board to provide new high school leadership with the resources they need for a successful transition and to assess how reductions can be implemented in a way that maintains programming for all students at the high school. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Hi, friends. Amy Weber, 94 Maple Avenue. I high schooler and a middle schooler.
But just use the mic. Sorry.
Oh, here, I'll do it again. Hi, Amy Weber, 94 Maple Avenue. I have a high schooler and a middle schooler. This is my very first public comment, believe it or not. I love this town. I love this school district. I think this is the best board that this district has had in a long time. You are kind, you are thoughtful, you are fiscally conservative. And as such, I really need to ask you to think so carefully and do so much research before you make these cuts to the high school faculty. I can tell you that just this week, we went into guidance counselor meetings, and in the 10th grade guidance meeting, the guidance counselors told us as parents, don't worry if you get your kids' schedules this summer and you have 1, 2, or 3 study halls on their schedule. That just means that nothing they requested was available during those periods. This year, before these cuts are made, my sophomore has a study hall that he does not want, but it was because he had health first semester, and second semester, only 1 elective was available to him, and it didn't fit anywhere in his education plan. And this is a kid who reads the program of studies like it is a toy catalog at the holidays. He has a long, long list of teachers he wants to take, classes he wants to take, and when I look at the cuts that you want to make to APs, you will absolutely harm kids' transcripts and their prospects. You cannot have these kids and then just say, oh, well, you know, it's a small school district, we can't offer everything, and I would flip that back to you and say, it's a small district. You can't lose 1.8 general ed high school teachers without feeling massive, massive losses. That being said, I do have a middle schooler. Our sophomores went through the middle schooler with 8 principals and assistant principals. During COVID, it was, as most people like to refer to it, a dumpster fire. We want Scott to be so successful, and he has already made so many changes. I applaud everything that wants to happen at FMS, but I would ask you to carefully slow it down if possible so that you do not irreparably harm those kids who are already being remediated at the high school for their middle school years. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. I too am very short. Thank you. I appreciated the opportunity to hear the budget presentation. Very interesting. However, I also heard today that the bond issue was removed from tonight's agenda, but it has not been removed from my agenda. It has not escaped my notice that the board has decided to put the school budget vote up for a vote in May and the bond for a vote in June, 2 elections, which will cost taxpayers more than a single election would. You might say that the budget and the bond are 2 separate issues, and in many ways they are, but in important ways they are one issue, the issue of affordability for the taxpayers of our community. We're living in frightening, turbulent times. I've lived in Hastings for over 40 years. I sent all 3 of my children through the school system. I've supported the school system and the budget all these years, but the financial stability of members of our community is uncertain. I know the excellence of our schools has made Hastings an attractive place to raise and educate children. Families with children are far from the only residents of this village. I support maintaining our school buildings. I wish we had devoted more attention to them in the past. Neglect leads to waste. 70% of the households in Hastings do not have a child in the school system. I'm part of that group. I feel the Board of Education has not seriously taken us into consideration when you foist this extravagant bond issue upon us. I wonder why you've decided to split the elections about the budget and the bond issue into two. It seems to me that doing this may confuse some voters, certainly will inconvenience all of us, and will cause unnecessary expense. Can you explain why you did that? I have my suspicions. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's because of,
I'm sorry?
because the architects weren't going to be ready until then.
No. Good evening.
Good evening, Jim Metzger, 427 Warburton Avenue. So there are other factual themes aside from what we're looking at here tonight, and they exist. There is a reality outside of the bubble of the Hastings School District. We are facing unprecedented reduction in the ability for us to live the lives that we came to understand we would be living at this point, due to the federal government. We touched very briefly on federal funding to the Department of Education. We are also losing the possibility, of Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, disability insurance. The stock market is down. Those of you that think your 401ks are going to provide for you, that's not certain. Healthcare in general is being threatened by the Department of Social Services. We are looking at an extreme recession. All of this is to say that we can sit here and talk about we want to spend money on this, we want to spend money on that. That money may not be here. And I think this board needs to take that very seriously and to not plan for that at this point and commit us to certain expenses without looking at the future of where this country is going is doing a disservice to every person in this village. I also want to know if anybody on this board has talked to anybody on the comp plan committee. The village is about to pass a comp plan. They're going to be proposing it. My guess is they're going to pass it. And they're asking for an extreme amount of additional housing in the village. Has anybody looked at that? Do you have any idea what that is going to do to the board? And if you don't and you haven't weighed in with the comp plan, again, you're doing a disservice to this village. I believe that your goal should not be how to do more with more, but how to do more with less, because that's the reality that we're facing. And I support your kids, I really do. I think education is extraordinarily important, but there is a reality to those of us that live here, and we need to face that reality, and your kids need to face that reality. I want to give them the best education that they can get with all of the services that they need, but it has to be done with the understanding that there is not an unlimited spigot of money coming your way. So you need to take another deep dive, another look at this, and figure out what's going to happen 6 months from now or a year from now, because you're not going to have the budget that you think you do, because a lot of people in this village are going to be suffering tremendously. So I thank you for your concern and your time, and please consider the rest of us that live in the village. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Joyce DeVilbus, 565 Broadway. I want to speak about the bond issue. Yes, it is a lot of money, but even if it were a small amount of money, I would not be in favor of the artificial turf. I am very much concerned about health issues and the issues surrounding our environment. Artificial turf will last 8 to 10 years. It will need to be replaced. All of this plastic being thrown away, what about our environment? What about our oceans? Is there some way we can reduce the amount of plastic that we are using every day in our lives. I do not feel that artificial turf is the answer for Hastings or any community in our country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening. I'm Tammy Black for Glen Place. I'm the mother of a high school sophomore and a high school junior, and I've been a PTSA executive board member for the past 11 years. I initially got involved in the PTSA to advocate for a social emotional learning program at Hillside because 11 years ago, Hillside looked very different. Tonight, I'm not wearing my PTSA hat. I'm speaking as a high school parent who is very concerned, to put it mildly, that the budget proposed this evening does not consider hiring replacements for retiring teachers in math, English, and social studies. The impact on our high school students and teachers will be profound. A few years ago, people sitting in these seats spent so much time establishing the North Star of our district, the portrait of a Hastings learner. I'm left thinking of the attributes of that today and wondering how they can be applied here. I have to be candid. I'm having so much trouble figuring out how those attributes can be applied to this budget. It certainly doesn't appear bold to me. Stifling academic growth for our high school students who will be unable to explore areas of interest and curiosity, not bold. Doesn't strike me as collaborative. I'm wondering how much input high school leadership had in these recommendations at all. I do worry we aren't setting our new high school leadership up for success with profound cuts hitting that building. I also wonder if some of the exciting advances that you shared slated to happen at FMS could happen over a couple of years instead of all at once. Empathetic. This doesn't at all foster a sense of equity. Seems like the students impacted are solely the high schoolers. Empowered. With so many classes being cut, our high schoolers certainly don't have a voice in the construction of their learning experience. Inquisitive. Seems like curiosity and academic exploration is being shut down, with classes being removed and class size increasing. My own junior in high school, looking at colleges now, meeting with her college consultant every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock, had weeks-long discussion, AP Stats or Calculus. Which way are we going? They decided on AP Stats. Inventive. Our district has always valued offering many paths and opportunities so students can create and explore areas of interest. But again, ballooning class sizes and limiting class options doesn't strike me as inventive. I also want to point out, my own children, my high school junior has 25 students in her English elective, 21 students in pre-calc, 24 in AP Bio, 17 in Latin, which for note is Latin 3 and 4, 20 in English, 11 honors, 14 in SUPA. The discussions that are had in that class would blow your minds. Can't be more than that if you want to have a lively discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just finish by saying 23 in my sophomore's genetics class, 24 in English, 10 in her Latin, 19 in Algebra 2 honors, 27 in her history class, 24 in chem. Please consider not cutting the high school legs off.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello. My name is Jennifer Destin. I live at 140 Fairmont Avenue. I have a 10th grader, and I have been on the executive board of SEPTA, I don't know, for 10 years. It's been a long time. I think we've heard a lot about special education today, but I do want to point out that when you get to the high school, you're really not in special education settings. So how a child navigates the high school environment who has an IEP isn't so much dependent, I mean, it's somewhat dependent on things like resource rooms and ICTs, but it lives and dies on the gen ed classroom. If it's a great classroom, if it's an okay class size, if it's all engaging and involving, it's going to be really good for an IEP student. If it's super large, if it means there's less attention that a teacher can give, the first students who are going to be impacted are kids with IEPs. So it's great. I love the consulting teacher model. But I think we're kind of fooling ourselves if we don't think that the impacts in the general education classrooms aren't going to land as squarely on kids with IEPs. Secondly, I want to say that our biggest concern, my daughter and I's, when she started the high school, was the ability to maximize her opportunities while creating success for her. So when she's looking at her classes for next year as a junior, she's looking at it in a really holistic way. She's saying, if I take these two things, it means maybe I can't press the pedal so much as on another, right? Because that's the reality of how she learns. She's thinking about what she can do senior year that will supplement what she does junior year. If she thoughtfully chooses electives, and then all of a sudden they're gone because they happen to be the ones that were subscribed the less, that can actually have a real impact on her GPA, on what she can do for college. These aren't like playtime. These are real things. And lastly, I want to say two things. We all acknowledge that the math at FMS was not optimized. My child had that as well, and she gets a lot of extra help because of it. I don't quite understand how we could be thinking of not having one less math teacher and less AIS sections at the same time. Class sizes are going to be bigger, but the help is also going to be bigger, and that to me also doesn't seem fully evolved. That's it for now.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi. I'm Emma Solers. I live at 10 the Fenway. I am the parent of an 11th grader and an 8th grader, and I've been a member of the PTSA Executive Committee since 2018. I very much appreciate the financial constraints and also the questions and the comments from our board members tonight. Thank you for your thoughtful input. I also absolutely appreciate the need to balance competing priorities. I do want to just highlight 3 points and really ask 3 things of the board as you continue in this process. When making decisions about what classes are cut, if cuts need to be made, please prioritize core areas of study and academic rigor like AP Euro, AP Stat. These are essential not only for college admissions, but also really continued growth and opportunity for challenge and inquiry for our children and for development of their interests. Second, please make decisions with the input of teachers and department chairs. They are closest to the work and to the students that will be impacted by this. Third, please don't consider all classes by the same criteria. Low enrollment last year is one factor, but this enrollment changes year to year, especially as the sizes of the grades change year to year. And enrollment over time, historically, would be a much more accurate measure if that's something that we have to consider. So please consider the electives, not just as a one-off who signed up last year, but as part of a holistic approach to the full course offering of the kind of high school we all want our kids to go to. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Tim Bear, 18 Kent Avenue.
guess let me start. I know many of the people in the room. I don't know all of you. My wife is Sarah Walters. She's the chair of the English department from 2016 to 2020. I was a Board of Education member, sitting in the seats that you're in now. And my son is a freshman, rising sophomore next year, part of this class of 150 kids. What you do is hard. I have a lot of respect for trying to make a budget work in the times. Budgets are hard at all times. They only get harder, in the environment we're currently in. When I was in your seats, I thought in FTE terms as well. Now as a parent, I think in human terms. And the way I see this, there's a position in English, a position in social studies, and a position in math that isn't getting replaced. So then in basic math, 2 to 3 electives per subject won't be offered. So we're looking at 6 to 9 electives. Now, Alex, you mentioned the program of studies is 80 advanced classes. But it's not really right, because AP English is going to continue to run. Calculus AB is going to continue to run. So true electives that we're talking about is 30 to 35. So we're talking about cutting or not being able to run 6 to 8 of 35 classes. You're talking about reducing choice 25% plus or minus of available classes. And who does it impact? It impacts 391 kids. So 25% reduction in choice for 391 students. I strongly urge you to figure out how to not do this.
Thank you.
And I guess I would say this. Tell me if my math is wrong. Tell me if I'm understanding the elective loss incorrectly, right? That, I would love to see that addressed, because the way it's been presented is it's a small scalpel, 80 classes. No, I just don't see it that way.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi. This is my first event. I didn't know I had to prepare stuff, and I never give a comment to anybody. But I'm just my son's voice and the friends' voices, so I'm just going to second what a lot of people said. Gravely concerned about the reduction of teachers at the high school level. I have a high schooler and a middle schooler, right? One of them with an IEP. I'm concerned about the reduction in the electives. I'm going to second what somebody else said. Just looking at prior enrollment, I'm not sure it's an indication. So just as an example, I just don't understand how we're going to eliminate AP Euro and contemporary politics in the current environment. I mean, for somebody like my son who wants to change things, I don't know what I'm going to tell him. It's just hard to understand. And I know that you put a lot of work on this, and I know it's not easy, but I'm really concerned about that. And I'm gravely concerned about the reduction in AIS offerings. It's just we're going in the wrong direction. 62. I don't understand what it means, but it's bad. So I ask you to reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening to you. Andy Zimmerman, 7 Ridge Street. I'm going to talk about music because it's the thing I know about the most, but I think maybe it's a lesson as to what happens when you start cutting. A music teacher was cut first half of the music teacher was cut 2 years ago, then the other half of the music teacher was cut. We were told that only .4 was going to be taken off, but then presto, the next year, .6 was taken off. So these things can go little by little. And everything was going to be fine. And we saw a nice presentation with colors last year showing how the lessons were going to still be taught. These are not individual lessons. They are group lessons that help teach kids how to play their instruments as opposed to having the whole band, which, talking about class size, the band or orchestra could have, or chorus could have 60 people in it. Some of them are that big. Hard to get any individual attention that way. So we've had, ever since I can remember in Hastings, we've had these group lessons or sectionals where, you know, you get the saxophone players together or whatever, the woodwind players, the brass players, and teach them something about their instrument. Very important for people that may not be able to afford private lessons, so there's an equity issue here. And if you don't get that, the students are not actually learning how to play their instruments, and it's bringing down the level of music for everybody. So that is the kind of thing that happens when you start cutting teachers, and now we have 5 music teachers for the schools as opposed to 6, which is what we've always had usually before, less than any of our neighboring districts have. The ideal thing would to be, you know, we have one coming back from leave who's a good teacher. We have his replacement who is still here, another good teacher. To have both of them on board would get us back up to 6, and that would be the thing to do. But I understand also the people that are worried about cutting the other teachers, and I'm saying, let's keep the teachers strong and look for somewhere else to cut. And I'm going to just end by saying, there's more money in this village than ever before. I mean, I've lived here for a long time. I went to these schools. Yeah, I see the whole arc of history here. I don't understand why we need to get rid of teaching positions that we've always had when it seems like we have, the people who live here have more money than they used to. Something about that doesn't add up, and I think we're all going to have to examine where is all the money going, and I don't really have an answer to that. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Also short, just following the line. My name is Alyssa Cohen. I live 1 Zinser Way. I have the luxury of having 2 children in the district who are at 2 of the ages where I think these cuts are really going to impact, and I am just going to call them what they are. They're cuts. And that's, I have a child who's in 5th grade and I have a child who's in that massive class of rising 10th graders. And I think I'm echoing, you know, a lot of what's already been said by some of the other speakers, but really on reflection, when I look at this, the most unfortunate aspect of this, and I think it's really apropos that we're here on the 5-year anniversary of COVID being declared a pandemic, it's really unfortunate that, you know, our children who really suffered under the deficits of the middle school, which became really apparent during the pandemic. I think we had a lot of time to really dig in and see what those deficits are, and they are still living with those deficits now. So when we were having those conversations about improvements in the middle school, it was yes and, right? So now we're saying yes, but, right? So it can't be the case that we're strengthening everything, you know, we're fixing everything from before, but then the kids who went through that, right, we're not providing them the support. And not only that, we're taking away the things that they need because of those deficits they had from middle school, like the AIS classes. And, you know, I think somebody mentioned, one of the speakers said that it's not equitable, right? The cuts are not equitable. And I, first of all, really do thank you. And I should have started by saying thank you for all of your efforts in putting this together. And again, anyone who works in any organization knows how difficult budgeting is, especially, you know, when you have funding deficits and challenges that you're trying to overcome creatively. But I just don't think that it can be the case where we, you know, just sort of prioritize one thing to the exclusion of the other. It's not equitable. And I would say, yes, it disproportionately affects kids in the high school, but I think it, even more than that, is going to disproportionately affect a particular subsection of students within the high school who aren't necessarily on the advanced track, who are following a pathway or progression that's been designed so that they would be in one of those big, larger AP classes. It's really going to affect the kids who rely on the electives to have those challenges and who reflect those challenges on their transcript, and who also need AIS, right? Because they don't have that structure in place that they had in elementary school or in middle school to really bring them up to level, right? We're not even talking about going above and beyond at this point. We're talking about a group of kids who really need extra support to get to grade level. They are missing like 4 years of instruction, like intensive instruction. I'm just gonna call it for what it is, in reading and writing and the core subjects that we're cutting here. So I would really ask everyone to reconsider these cuts that are not apples to apples, right? You're taking away full-time core subject teachers and as well as the support system, and you're replacing it with lots of things that, yes, we need, but it's really apples and oranges. So I would again just ask everyone to go back and look and consider and shake the tree a little bit more to come up with some creative solutions that don't actually, you know, deprioritize the kids who need the most help. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
I echo everything that was said by the high school parents. I have a 12th grader, a 9th grader.
I'm sorry, what's your name then?
Sorry, Angus Chen, 21L, please.
Thank you.
I echo everything that was said by the high school parents. I just want to add 2 specific points for your consideration as you deliberate the budget. One is the discussion about electives being cut kind of overlooks a baseline fact that I've been trying to figure out how to raise with you guys for some time now, which is our 9th graders and 10th graders have 0 opportunity for honors and AP classes other than math. And so we talk about losing these electives, but actually, you know, someone made the point earlier about a rigorous curriculum. We don't even have honors English available for 9th and 10th graders, okay? So please think about that as you're also thinking about cutting electives. The other point I wanted to raise is there was a 0.4 FTE attributed to science research. I don't know if people realize this, but science research is an existing program, so it's not like we're creating something. It's a 2-year commitment, as I understand it. So we're taking this allocation and adding a 3rd year to science research, and it's capped off at what I've been told is 30 kids. So in the class of 150 kids, that's only available for 20% of the class. It seems like a disproportionate allocation for something that already exists as a 2-year program. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you all very much. We're going to move on to the presentation on the FMS flood update.
Yeah, okay. No one wants to stay here then? Okay, so I did not, what was that? I didn't do a slide deck, but I just wanted to provide, as we've been doing at every board meeting, an update, because of course that's a large undertaking that we're still managing at this time. So again, following the flood incident, we're continuing our efforts at middle school are ongoing. As you know, we do meet weekly with the project team, which would be typical in any type of construction project, but this one being, we're dealing with so many more people involved in here with insurance adjusters and all the rest. So it's even beyond like a normal kind of oversight of what would be like, say, a capital project. This evening, there are 3 items related to this within the business section, that there are 2 recommendations, and it's connected to this update, and I attached memos for an explanation, but the one item that's related to, we went in the beginning of the flood incident and released money out of what is our property loss insurance reserve. As the project has evolved through the, you know, since it's occurred, there's a lot of different folks in doing evaluations on systems and engineers and sprinkler analysis, which of course was extremely important for two reasons, because we wanted to understand, you know, was the, at both ends of the building, like to see what our current sprinkler system was and ensure that anything that needed to be addressed during this time was being addressed. So that leads me to explain that the release of that money is to pay for a new fire suppression system at Farragut Middle School, because when you're dealing with insurance, it's, the current code requires full coverage of a sprinkler system in the building. That does not currently exist, right? Because the coverage is based upon when it was put in 50, 60, 70 years ago, when that fire suppression system was put in. That being said, you're grandfathered until you start really reconstructing areas. Now, that being said, it would, even beyond the fact of if the code were to say, well, you know, you can get away with it, it wouldn't be a smart decision because A, you have a very old system that now has been further compromised, and if there was a reoccurrence of any type of flood, we would never be covered by insurance because we weren't addressing one of the root causes of what, you know, caused the flooding to begin with. That being said, you know, and it's connected somewhat, not so much with the budget. We talk about the budget tonight, but there's a lot of facilities issues that beyond, you know, if we didn't have this reserve set up, we would be talking about removing $750,000 worth of spending out of.
Say again, I'm sorry?
If we did not have this reserve for insurance loss, that serendipitously a lot of my colleagues were saying, you know, you got to get money in here, because not only that, with the Child Victims Act claims alone, people are seeing neighboring districts $2 to $3 million out-of-pocket claims. I say that there's things even beyond our operational budget, and thankfully we have that money. Had we not had that money, this evening we would be discussing how are we going to come up with $750,000 to pay for. And again, not saying the fire suppression system, that system may cost us $500, or it could be $600. We're hoping to get some credits back from the insurance. It's like net cost. But as we know, there's the PA system upgrades that we're looking at. There's other things in which there's a couple of things. We're taking advantage of the fact that we're able to accomplish some of the things that were flagged on our building conditions survey that were either deemed to be needing to be upgraded, and we're actually being able to do so at a much cheaper cost. I say all this to say that, you know, as we have this budget tonight, we are now clearing out that reserve. And we're, you know, that would leave us, if any occurrence, as an example, we also, well, part of that reserve is also covering the pipe that broke during the last break at Hillside School. That's not covered by insurance, an exterior pipe that we went out of pocket for an 8-hour job was like $70,000. That's a real cost to the district. So these are, all of these things, you know, as we grapple with, and I know there was, not that I'm trying to keep continuing the budget conversation, but I'm listening and hearing one of the items, and I always, not to be comparison, part of it is the budget does seem large, but it's not large comparatively to other districts like ours. This year, the Irvington School District is, I believe, they're already either proposing $79 to $80 million in a budget. That's $20 million more than we have, with maybe 80 students more than we have. So when you look at like our ability to even really manage the expenses we have is becoming, you know, part of it is just the amount of our budget. I say that to say, like, either we're going to consider increasing our budget significantly or we don't. You know what I mean? And because there are only so many dollars, but I think it's a good reason, not that, it is a good comparison. I'm not saying we are Irvington, but they're a very similar school district to Hastings. Their budget is $20 million more than ours. And this is not, we don't have a $200 million budget, so the percentage increase to Tim's, calculation of that, that's a significant switch. And in addition, we are now needing to clear out reserve to address other issues. So they also have more reserves than we do. And I say that just as a point of question that however we proceed, we will have to do so by either making other further reductions, elsewhere if we're going to put something else in. And quite frankly, there will be a time in which you will have to consider an override of some sort, if not this year and in future years, in order to kind of keep up with expenses, because the expenses are outpacing. We looked at our earlier budget presentation, our general liability insurance from $50,000, $50 grand in 1 year. Like that is something we have to pay for. I'm even kind of concerned about the things that I discussed tonight that we may not know of today as we sit here. So we just have to question ourselves as we move forward on, what do you want us to bring next? Do you want to do a full analysis of all class sizes, district-wide, to the other areas? I don't know, but I know there's a lot of concern, but I'm having a concern about other matters too, and how this budget that we're going in next year wouldn't even really allow for if there were property damage of any sort. We would have some issues, So hopefully at the end of this year, if there's any extra money, we have to replenish that reserve first and foremost. And we're also going to net over the years our reserves, which we'll discuss at a potential future board meeting, as you determine your budget, you also have to look at how much reserves you have, you know, what's the likelihood of being able to replenish them, how long, you know, those are offsets to we're moving in reserves to offset expenses, right? We're using $850,000 of a retirement reserve. Had we not had that reserve, that's $850,000 additional money. So this is, again, partly I know there was somebody saying the money, and again, I'm not saying, you know, $62 million is a lot of money, but in comparison to many neighboring districts with a very similar size enrollment, they have significant more higher budgets. So it does become difficult to make everything work. So.
Just a question, I guess it's on the business items, but on the fire protection, what's the total cost? Is it 60 and change?
No, that's just the engineering. It's going to be over 600,000.
Oh, wow.
Out of our budget?
It depends on, we're working with the insurance right now to see what because the fact of the matter is, there's a right, they're not giving you the credit for the existing system, and because the existing system is not what it would need to be now as a replacement. It's almost like double like what exists. There's not sprinklers throughout the middle school currently, or in that. We're only addressing the Farragut complex. We're not even speaking about the remainder of the building. We're only speaking about that one section. But it has to be, yes, it has to be replaced.
But if the code has changed, the requirement for insurance is to meet current code, yes?
Yes, but they're suggesting that some of it may not be at the full level, so that's where we're like working through it with them, so they may not, this is just one of the areas in which there's probably gonna be a shared responsibility in the cost of that. And we're working through that with them. But again, these are things as different kind of items come up. We know there were things in which we were using that money for like the insulation that didn't previously exist. There were things in which that were uncovered when they did the demolition that were not related to the flood, but are important things to address because they would be safety concerns, quite frankly, that were now unearthed. I don't know. So there's dollars that are our responsibility, and there's dollars. I think with this fire suppression system, depending on what credit we are trying to say based on the current code that it would be their responsibility, but there's, that's TBD, and there's going to be coverage limits and things that come into play, and dollars of where those coverages fall that may, require a shared responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like a sense of, as you go through it, like what the damage is basically for us, what hits our books, because, we were kind of working under the assumption that most or the vast majority would be covered.
The vast majority is still being covered, because right now it's over $6 million. I mean, right now the claim is like close to like a $6 million claim, if not higher. So, even with that, there were things that we were taking the opportunity to address that would be less expensive because the entire area is gutted, and there were things that are on our list that it would be more like double the cost once everything's put back into place. So there's a few $100,000 of that are optimal. I just have to release the remainder depending upon where we end up with the credit for the fire suppression system.
How does that get sussed out, Maureen? Like, how does it get sussed out, like, depending on what the pre-existing conditions were that were revealed by the demo work? Like, what falls on our account and what is covered? I mean, that might be too broad a question for you to answer.
What it is they can determine, was this flood related or was it pre-existing condition? And if it's pre-existing, it's ours. If it's flood, it's theirs. But there's things in terms of compliance and all the rest that there becomes these kind of gray areas that you have to kind of go back and forth with them a bit, because they're, challenging if that were to be necessary. But I would say that even if we could have the fire suppression system that existed and they were like, okay, the state will allow you to be grandfathered because it would not be a smart decision to leave that fire suppression system in place. That's what I will say. So if there's like some, way that they can find that the state would grandfather us to keep in the old system, but that old system was not, it would still require significant upgrades to get it back functioning, and then the concern about, that eventually it was slated to be replaced anyway.
No, I mean, we don't want to mess around with
it's 80
standards on
years
fire
old.
safety
I mean,
rules.
the general
No.
answer is this is a struggle.
the important news is from the very minute this occurred, we had the right people on site looking, documenting, and all the rest. And Maureen has been more than weekly, several times a week, managing to get to that exact answer and being quite correctly forceful on it. But this is a standard back and forth, as you probably know. And then, you know, our own view on that from experience, and then Leanne's experiences. You know, there's going to be a back and forth here, and we're going to try and be as strong as we can on, sorry, that's what we're, you know, insisting on, and, you know, but other places aren't so quick to get the right people in the room at the table. We at least did that within right away.
Right, we had our
Constant,
engineers.
regular conversation, discussions, looking at information, looking at analysis. You know, so we'll see, and we'll keep you posted. I mean, the fire suppression. Thank you. That's one of the first moments we're seeing where we've got a back and forth that could be, you know, and let's be real, there might be some others. I mean, this is a significant loss. It does tie back to as good as we've been in this district at working hard to maintain and address things. We just have not, you know, invested as we need to. And, you know, we're not alone in that, but we, you know, I put my sense out a couple months ago that we're tacking towards subpar here unless we begin to really deal with it. And it's, the chickens on this one have come home to roost. So we may have some expenses we didn't want. And so, but we're going to keep you actively posted. That's why we built it in as every meeting we're coming back to you with an update. And if we have to do more in between, we'll.
Yeah, and I just want to say that obviously, as I said, it's as the process has been ongoing. Initially, we weren't even thinking that would even need to be, you know, swapped out. So the initial thinking was, you know, in terms of the damage, but that's more of a code / functioning / no, once that, we had a special.
Yeah, there might be some other code type things that we can say.
I mean, that's what I'm saying, like, yes, that was true, and I said it, but there are things that come to light recently that now have changed some of what we think.
But you'll see all that because you have to vote on it. So you'll see it, we'll talk about it.
Well, just to be clear, I mean, the fire suppression system is being removed to be replaced.
Yeah, we have to.
Yeah, it has to.
Yeah,
and we're at a point, like, we won't get back in that building if we don't start making, you know, everything does require, because of the situation, it's not like a construction, like it's an addition where you're like, okay, we're not impacted, like each of these pieces, like waiting for those reports, waiting for engineers that came down for Schenectady, waiting for all their analysis, then to be able to do the next step has been actually holding up work, because we need to figure all these things out, get the engineers, get the attorney, like there's so many, believe me, I was on the phone late Friday night, like 7, 8, like here, like going back over these things. It's, you know, the part of the process, but it is significant. You're talking about a reconstruction of a building that hasn't been largely touched for 80 years, and it's almost $6 million worth of work that we're trying to do in like this amount of time with unknown factors, you know, so I mean, the good news is we at least had the insurance reserve, and that's just my point of saying that unexpected facilities issues without having significant reserves available are problems when you have nothing built into your budget to address it.
So Maureen, the vote, the business item for tonight is just the engineering fee for the system. And then when you have a number.
You'll approve this, yeah.
And that comes out of reserves? Reserves could handle it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just to say, you know, at this point, you know, because as now we're at a point, like once that we have the design and we get bids for the design, or the 3 quotes, because we're allowed to do that with the subs, then we would award whoever ends up being the low bidder for the work, and then you would approve it, and then at that time I'll say, you know, the insurance is going to contribute X amount, and, you know, if there's a share, if they're picking it up, great, if they're not, you know, but this is required, because if there's some of the money that we're going to have to pay toward it, this allows it, so, yeah. But I'm just saying, with between the installation, some other things that I know that are on us, like, you know, hopefully we don't spend the whole amount, but, you know, it's going to be, initially we thought like $350, now it may be closer to the entire amount.
So just another question as it relates to the bonds. What happens, so we're paying for this, let's just say whatever our number is.
Yes.
If the bond wasn't supported, it makes no difference, this is a standalone system, it upgrades the system, but the other parts of the building have the
Older
old
systems, yes.
But that's okay, it still works.
Well, you know what, like Alex said, that's the oldest part of the building, you know, so like even as an example, if a school is 50 years old, it's actually, you know, like 50 versus 70, 80, you know, so other parts of the building have different systems depending upon when they were built, and they're a little bit newer, so again, long-term, we will have to address those, and there are things that, you know, that's over like the 5-year plan, they weren't prioritized, but just in this part of the building, it is a good opportunity. It is going, regardless of who pays the final bill, it's still significantly less than had we been doing it with like a finished product building. If they were coming in after and having to remove things to put in these systems, it would be more, it would at least be at least $100,000 more, if not more costly.
It's bracing. Thank you. Thank you, Maureen. Any other questions, comments for the flood? Nope. We're going to move on to report from Dr. McCursey.
Yeah,
I know the kids hit a lot of those points,
Yeah,
right?
the plan was just, it's there, and what we're doing on these busy meetings is it's a good set of work that tomorrow it'll get blasted out by Melissa DiLiberto people so they see it.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to business items. Are there any questions or comments regarding business items 1 through 20?
Beyond what was just discussed, which was very helpful regarding number 16.
Yeah. No? Is there a motion to approve business items 1 through 20?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Sylvia was affirmative, the aye. Moving on to placement services for CSE and CPSE. Are there any questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve our placement and services for CSE and CPSE?
So moved.
That's a second for you?
Yep.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Moving on to personnel as a consent agenda. Are there any questions or comments regarding our appointments, our amendments, or our leaves of absence? No? Is there a motion to approve our consent agenda? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Moving on to minutes. This would have been from a month ago, February 11th. There's actually 2 of them in here. I'm sorry. There's also from the special board meeting of February 25th. Are there any questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve our minutes from the 2/11 and 2/25 meetings? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Moving on to policies. First reads, we have 8130, school safety plans and teams. We have 1120R, which is school district records regulation, and 8113, extreme heat condition days. Are there any questions, comments, or updates from the policy committee? Anything important that,
Sylvia, you want to add anything, or?
I mean, I think they're pretty self-explanatory. There's not any great insight that I would probably be able to point out for you, but.
and the extreme heat, that's following the new regulations from Albany.
Yes.
Is it 88 degrees? What was the, I forget. But
Yeah, 88. I had a question on like, has that actually happened where?
Well, fortunately,
88 degrees?
the-
We have AC.
Yeah, fortunately, we have almost no space that we would trip this, so to speak. This has been an active topic amongst the superintendents because for all our facility concerns, we actually, even though they're window units, which obviously has its own issues, we do have AC in almost every single space. And if we do trip it, we have a place that students can go. But there are a surprising number of districts that this is going to be a problem.
Huge. Well, and pre-bond
And the
at
key
Hillside, it would have been a big problem.
Key phrase that the superintendents are leaning in on page 4 up at the top, first sentence, comma, when practicable.
Yeah.
So that, because that's the sentence right there. Otherwise, well, that's the paragraph, because if you can't do it, you shut down and send everybody home. But anyway, the good news for us is we should be fine with this.
The only places we have issues are upstairs and because we use window units, and that's really, you're really supposed to have central air units in the 5th grade classrooms. We can't add any more, like we have to upgrade our electrical load. We can't put even an additional. So sometimes those classrooms get warm.
But they all still have AC.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
so-
with one though, it doesn't. in fairness, if the fifth graders are watching, it does get warm upstairs, even with the one AC because of where it is in the building. And it's not, a window unit is not really meant to AC a classroom.
Remember our DOE classrooms with no AC?
No,
it's different.
Yeah.
I think that's what that's what they attend to.
I remember the subway with no AC. Back when.
To echo Sylvia's point, I'm glad you zeroed on that one because that's one of concern across the state, but we should be okay, the 8113. The others are, again, 8130, that is so important, and also it matches where we are. And so, I don't know if there are any comments in the school district records, but they're straightforward.
Okay, it's first read, so we're not going to. We do have 3 second read policies that we looked at the previous meeting. These are 2245, student liaison representative, 4321, which is timeout and physical restraint, and 4321, second part, which is time and physical restraint as well, the regulations. Are there any questions or comments about these policies? Is there a motion to approve policy 2245, 4321.12, 4321.12R? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.
And I can circle back to a previous question that was asked. We've not had to use any timeout rooms during at least TESPIS time here in the district, and any breaks are instructional and or sensory related. I just wanted to circle back to verify what I had said the last time.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Second public comment. Oh, Andy, welcome back.
Oh.
Hello again.
Hello again, thank you. I just realized after I spoke before that there was a gap in what I said that kind of didn't make sense, so I just wanted to fill the gap. And that, as I was saying during the presentation last year of the budget when we were talking about music, there was these nice slides that were saying that there would be lessons, group lessons, sectionals, whatever you want to call them, for the music students. But that hasn't happened. And the reason that it hasn't happened, there's 2 reasons. Number one, that they don't have enough time in their day, the teachers. They're working flat out all day long. And secondly, they're not being paid for it. There's not enough money. If you add up the FTEs, it doesn't add up to them having time to do these lessons. And so I hope we're not asking teachers to work without being paid. If there's any teachers watching out there, or their union representatives, I want you to know that the parents don't expect you to work without being paid. So I just wanted to say that. I hope we can get the program staffed again so we'll be able to do these things we'd like to do. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to agenda review. This is going to be our next meeting in March.
Oh, I'm looking at the meeting date.
25th?
Yes. Oh, March 25th, right. Sorry, I'm good. Never mind.
Okay. We're currently scheduled to have another budget update, and we're going to discuss the disbursement of the unused inclement weather days. Always a fun time. And
yes, and at that point, we will talk with you about what that side letter says and aspects of it, because it'll be an interesting discussion.
Before that,
I just want to do some discussions ahead of that before the board talks about it.
we do have somewhere, because I know the trustees are going to want to look at it, the provisional, we've assigned those provisionally somewhere. I forget where that document is, right?
Which?
The unused weather days.
No, there's an existing side letter that has certain language in it.
No, but I mean, have we provisionally assigned those 2 dates that we're going to approve, or okay?
Oh, no,
starting from scratch.
This is when we typically bring it to you to talk about the recommendation. What I have to, I'll say it. What we have to look here is there's a provision in there that if we're in violation of minutes for the state, that affects whether or not we provide these.
Gotcha.
We are in violation of minutes with the state. So what I have to sort through is what does that mean? And the timing for the next meeting is good. I need to engage in some discussions with HTA leadership and others on exactly what our situation is and how to address that. So I get, you know, and so we're in a public meeting, which it's important I say this, it's important you hear it, and we will know on the 25th where we are, what I'm recommending to you.
Gotcha.
So typically, that's where you'd get whatever the recommendation is.
Okay.
And we also, you should know, related to FMS, they are sitting on 3 days, whereas the rest of the district's sitting on 2 days. And so there's a minutes issue there, and we may be bringing to a recommendation where what we do is minimize our problem at the state, but we'll come back to you. As always, it's not an easy ski down the slope here.
Yeah.
And there could be a penalty, right? There could be fines.
There's always fines,
Yeah.
which, that's why, and to go full circle on that, that's why we have the stopgap program in the middle school. And that's, which we're hoping to address going into the next year through the contract, the new contract. Anyway.
Thank you.
That's a big introduction.
That is.
To next week. Oh, excuse me, next meeting.
2 weeks. Thank you.
But if I may underscore, yes, it's really important now that each meeting, before you vote, you have a chance to talk about the budget.
Yeah, we'll have 2 more meetings before the meeting where we vote, so.
Right, and, sorry.
That's good, thank you.
Well, actually, it's the appropriate time to say, it's often boards, this is neutral, say we need a work session or 2 in addition. And a work session is when you are here doing your work in public, there's not public comment. And it's focused on that agenda. So you can, you know, Alex, Sylvia, think with your colleagues what you want to do.
Will do, for sure.
Wait, for next week?
Well, no, in general, I'm saying. In general, you'd want to schedule those.
Yeah.
And let us know what you want to talk about so we're prepared.
I'll talk to everybody, for sure. Thank you. Let me open up for Board of Education comments.
I just wanted to say, I wanted to thank all the people who came and made a point of sharing their public comments with us, you know, as we were thinking through the budget process. And I actually wanted to respond to at least one of the threads that I heard through the public comment, and it refers to us as board members, so I might be slopping the things that I said, so I apologize for that. But one of the things that I heard is kind of the concept of thinking like as a human or a robotic member of the Board of Education. And I'm speaking for myself, not for my colleagues. I heard people refer to the fact that, you know, thinking as a board member or thinking as a human. And I'm just speaking for myself. I'm not implicating anybody else in my comment. But I would say that before I became a board member, I was a parent of 3 students in this community, and I've had 2 of those kids now either move on or being on the point of graduating from the system. And I don't think that you ever sit in this seat as a board member and divorce yourself from the fact that you're also a member of this community, a taxpayer, potentially a parent, and all of those things intersect, and yet they can't come into play on how you make decisions as a board member. Why? Because when you're not on the board, you get to be an advocate for whoever your particular child is, whoever you feel you are representing in your thoughts. But when you sit on the board, you have to advocate for the system. And sometimes that makes decisions that are actually gonna, if in my case, I have children in the system, if perhaps some of these, you know, decisions get made to make cuts at the high school or whatnot, that would implicate my child. It's not that I think, oh, well, I don't care about my child and that's why I'm making that decision. No, I make these decisions because I also understand there's a very real financial constraint. I'm not saying that what was presented today is the best and final product, but I'm responding to the fact that people somehow think that we sit up here without a care in the world and just, you know, people shell out to us numbers and we just go along with that. I assure people there is a lot of thought and frankly a lot of anguish in terms of the real deep thought that goes into this process. The 7 of us who are elected members of this community to serve on this board, we're not here because we're being paid in pizza slices. We're here because we care about the kids, we care about the staff, and we care about the district. So this is a tough job. I don't even know what to say. I think I'm probably just emoting through my thoughts thoughts, and I apologize for that, but I just want people to also understand when they come and share their comments with us, we are in fact actually human beings. So I just wanted to speak for myself.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Well said,
Thank you.
Sylvia,
Thank
as
you.
always. And I
As
think the
always.
other thing that, is true is that we did not entertain a lot of things that were asked, right? Like, people made their own cuts, the principals made, this is not like a first crack at this. A lot of decisions were made, and this didn't include a whole lot of stuff. So it is tough to make the call on what stays in but how do you get to a workable budget? So, yeah.
And it's a thoughtful deliberation. It's not
It
like
is.
we show up here and somebody gives us something and where there's just like marionettes. We are not. We are thinking through what does this mean in real time for the elementary school, for the middle school, for our students in the high school, and the people they choose to become once they leave our district. It's a process, and again, are we perfect? Do we get it right every single time? Is there always room for improvement? Absolutely. But I will stand behind and, have the back of all my trustees up here, because I know people work hard, and I know that people really dig deep into contemplating and balancing and asking hard questions. So that's all I've got to say.
Thank you,
Thank
Sylvia.
Thank you. Thank you. Definitely well said.
I just want to, I'm thinking about the instructional budget and what parents were saying about please find the money elsewhere, not in the high school budget. And I didn't say this, I just wanted to bring this up. In the middle school budget, there's $150K for executive functioning program for 6th and 7th graders. And I have a child with executive functioning issues, and if somebody could solve that, his world would be totally different. But so I know a lot about executive functioning issues, and I don't really, I question how a whole class can how one teacher or a program taught to a whole group of students, maybe like 25 kids, can be effective when executive functioning is so individualized. Executive functioning deficits are so individualized. I mean, I've paid people one-on-one with my child, and we are still like stuck. And so I'm not really sold on this $150K for an executive functioning program.
Yeah, I think it actually does, and I'll go back and ask Scott, I think it's that plus, because that's part of, he had this like whole plan, but it also allows them to have like 6 sections across 5, 6, 7, 8, and then, so I think it's partly that and partly probably someone who may have other responsibilities or different, I don't know if
see.
it would be the same person, but it's I think connected to wanting to bring that in, but that individual would maybe, like, there would also be an FTE across the other areas that I remember. It was because I picked that up off of his presentation, but I know that the way that these were connected, and maybe we can circle back to that. I know some people said, can you tier it in? I know there was a piece that like everything kind of is connected, the ability to kind of make everything work is connected to having a certain, they needed like the 2 FTEs, the K6 with the, like it kind of they were all kind of connected.
I mean, I'd love to learn more.
Yeah.
I'd love for us to learn more about that, because it's a lot of money, $150,000 when we're thinking about cutting the electives in the high school for budgetary reasons. And some of the classes, right, at the middle school, like there was organizational skills, it was really bad, like a waste of time.
Well, that's all part of the plan, is to sweep in and
But
change all that.
so putting in something like executive functioning class makes me a little nervous too, that it's not gonna be good. And so I'm just really speaking that I would love for us to really maybe take a deep dive into that.
Well, a work session and something like
Yeah,
that.
and, go ahead.
Yeah.
And also, I was
Go
gonna
ahead.
say, I know we're offering an economics and finance class potentially at the middle school, and that meets a core state requirement. But I know that there's part of the facts class talks about personal finance and, economics, and, yeah, there's some repetition in there, like, why doesn't he just teach an economics
I
and
don't think there's an
finance
increase
class?
there. I think there's a switch in
But I
the
think
facts.
you're
It's
into
not-
something really interesting, and I think it almost would be helpful to hear Scott explain it. Like, what's his vision? Hear Andy come and speak to the board and explain it, because sometimes it's really helpful to hear the building level leaders, like vision and how
Yeah.
it works. What's their 5-year plan? What does this mean? Because I think that's something I heard a lot tonight too, is people wanted to know about that process,
Yeah.
like the involvement of the department chairs and the
Right.
principals, and of course it's great to hear from central admin, but it'd be good to hear the principals, like.
Yeah, I wanna just put that out there as some thinking.
So if I may, just on a couple of things here, I mean, kind of, because the time is tight, you've got several weeks here to vote, and that's why I mentioned earlier the work session. I think I've scribbled about 15 to 16 questions and issues. It would be helpful, and we've done this before, today's Tuesday, almost Wednesday, if by Friday you could send in right now your first pass at a key set of questions. And then we meet at some level, though I may have to alter on Friday, and then we'll talk, because we'll start setting up what's called an FAQ, and thanks to Melissa D, if you go into your website under budget, it's already now updated for this go-round. And so tonight's presentation will be posted, and then we need to start building out FAQs, which is important, at least all those on the public comment that we're listening and responding. I would argue is as important that your decision makers, so they're more important, would be, what are the questions you really need answered? And that'll be sequentially, but if we get them submitted together, then we can sort out how to address them, how to get answers. Is it principals speaking to you? Is it something else? And when and how to do that. If it's personnel items that maybe we're inching towards, we have the right to go into executive session. That's where it'd be, the sooner we can figure out kind of, if you will, the set of questions, that'll really help us, if that makes sense.
I just would say one more thought I'm having, since this is a commenting section, on HASP. So many people that I talk to in the village have no idea what HASP is, even high school parents. And then I see, that there's only 5 kids in a HASP class, and I'm thinking that we don't really advertise what the HASP program is. We're not really doing good marketing for the HASP program, and it would maybe offset some of the core class sizes if there were actually more kids in the HASP program.
Except that the counselors do know, and the people who schedule kids do know about HASP, I believe. And I think when they believe that kids are appropriate, they make the recommendation, as opposed to, anyway.
That's accurate, my understanding. It's very guidance driven, teacher driven.
I mean, we have 5 kids, and it's a really nice program. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a comment. Something that's just.
I don't think so.
You've been
Silence. Silence.
I know, it's funny.
It's okay. I can use this one.
There we go.
Hello?
Oh,
You can be stereo.
No, right on. Something that just came up for me with the public comment was a couple of the community members talked about the Hastings of a Portrait Learner, and that's something that's been sitting with me since our last meeting when we had our discussion about the holiday calendar, where we had 2 board members had differing interpretations of the calendar, which is totally fine and agreeable, but I kind of worry when we're taking one guiding framework and we're interpreting it in different ways, and now I see community members now using the framework to guide their thoughts of how we should make decisions. So I think that it might be worth it as a superintendent team to maybe revisit the portrait and maybe have some level of presentation on how it's living in the school and how it should guide decisions of the board, decisions of the superintendent's team, decisions of the students to advocate for themselves. Because I know from like my perspective, coming on the board, it was all done prior to me getting here, prior to me and Catherine. And what is the update on it? And like, how should we really be using it to guide our work? Because sometimes these things just get plastered on a wall and then they just sit there, and then they're used every once in a while when, oh, by the way, we use that. And I'm not saying that's what you're doing at all, but I think maybe the board and the community could benefit from a revisit on it. Because these things are living documents. They should stay alive.
Yeah, and I mean, just to echo that, like, the portrait is great in many ways, but I don't know if it's like our vision statement or mission statement, right? Because it's just so big and covers so many different angles that I almost think we need to think of something that's like a one sentence that encapsulates us that then we can use as our real guiding North Star light or whatever when we make our decisions, from the budgeting to the calendar, whatever it is.
Yeah, I would just briefly second that. You know, in a lot of districts, what gets cut, it's literally like, what do people use the least? You know, it's the arts, it's the younger sports get jettisoned. And I do think that we are trying to, you know, the portrait is where we derive sort of the value that we're trying to have the kids get. So I do think we follow it, even unconsciously. So, but it is worth looking into, because I think it's, you know, 10 years ago they did a survey, we did a survey asking people to rank their priorities, and it was literally, the survey was totally unsurprising. It's whatever people were most involved in was what they put first, and it just dovetailed like that.
Okay. So I have a strong thought on this, which is Melissa Samanti's been really carrying the ball quite deftly. The, if you will, new team of principals they've come up with a sentence. It's very clear. And now, here's a strong statement. I think right now we are so busy. Let's get into the summer, and let's commit to a shared retreat on the portrait of you all with the three principals. I value including their assistant principals. Deep guidance from Melissa, because there are aspects to this too, restorative justice, et cetera, but I think it'd be this summer a good time to say, where are we, and as we're going into the new school year, I think that'd be a great team building moment, governance and administrative, if you will. And I think the sooner, if you agree with that, I think a nice day or two, we can let the principals know that. Adding any other work right now,
Agreed.
we have, for a district of 1,603 buildings, I ran a district of 9,000 students, and my daughter still remind me of that, but I've been gone longer. This collection of of course I had a massive team. This collection of complexity I have not seen before. I have not seen before.
Wow.
We have every ball in the air.
Yeah,
Three negotiations, a bond, a falling apart middle school, legitimate questions from families about us modifying the high school in ways that may be overdue, and how do we guide to that higher ground, issues of where will we get the money for other things, the threat of federal shifts, all the rest. I mean, you name it, it's there. And, you know, people say
The
reduce
world's
your
falling
administration
apart, but
team,
otherwise, it's
and
great.
you got the three people here backed up by a few. So,
Who's going to play drums?
so all I'd say right now is I couldn't agree more. Let's get to the summer, but commit to it.
It's great summer work.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think if you might just signal, and it's because it's also, and the other thing is I'm doing 20 teacher evaluations right now, which is pretty interesting.
I bet.
Well,
The
write-up part.
spoiler alert is we are a nurturing community of diverse learners who foster a just and compassionate society. And that is the North Star overarching everything, the one sentence of the portrait. And we have more work to do around the many things that are underneath all of that with the attributes. And we've got 3 main action steps that we're focused on, but to be continued.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just say, first of all, Sylvia, I really want to thank you. I very much appreciate your comments about this evening. And I feel like this has been a very long night, and Bill and Maureen, you have put an enormous amount of work into excellent presentations, and sometimes I don't know how you keep going going back to it and going back to it and revisiting, and it's really impressive. I do think that the number of balls that are up in the air is just astounding at this very exhausting, emotionally exhausting moment, certainly for me, I think probably for other people, and clearly people who were here tonight. I very much like that there were, even though it was a long night, and people sat through the presentation, and the public comment had a different feeling than other recent public comments. And people raised some interesting things. It's like just when you think you've sort of done it and put it, and you know, they kind of raise things that make you really think about whether it's music or high school. You know, I put on my hat as the head of chair of an admissions committee at a college, and thinking like, well, what would I think about some of these cuts? And at first I'm thinking like, no, this is really okay, this is really okay. You know, we can't be all things to all people. And I'm thinking, no, Jody, like, if the kids don't have well, it's a good thing that we've spent so much time and energy and money focusing on special ed. But at the other end of things, kids need to have APs. I mean, that will affect the college piece. Honestly, college admissions committees don't look, it's like, oh, but they're from Hastings and they can't really offer as many. It's not the way they work. And it's not like we have to offer everything, but I think we have to, I don't know if there's a way to juggle.
Yes, just an interesting point of information question. It's worth 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So when I was at the Archdiocese of Boston, I was asked to sit on a BU full scholarship selection committee because John Silver, infamous is the right word, had set up one for the public Boston and set up one for the Archdiocese. So these were already admitted BU students to get a full ride. And so I was in the inner sanctum. What count of APs did they stop counting to then say they've gone over the hurdle enough for us to think? What do you think, number? You may add your number. You may add a number for you. Were you undergrad?
I actually, I had the opposite. I'm undergrad, but BSMD, but admitting undergrads. 5.
5, which
right.
We can get, but something to look forward to, so meaning our junior, senior limits, our students are going to hit that.
Right.
Right?
And to your point, I have to say this to all the high school parents here, there's also the piece of people's children taking too many APs. When I would look at a transcript and see that kids were taking 4 and 5 APs, honestly, it would sour me a little.
And growing research that the actual value add is out of the IB side, not the AP side.
Right.
And remember
so
that
that's our next thing to think about.
That any claimant comes out of an IB path.
At Comac School of IB.
And Harrison has gone IB.
That's Sherry's IB.
That's bigger stuff.
I know, that's
but anyway,
not
I'm
today.
keeping us awake.
Anyway, I mean, it's
late
all
and
about
awake.
Such a balancing act, and I didn't mean to be so abrupt about the HASP program.
No, it's okay.
And I get it that it's one of
But
the.
parents advocate for their kids too.
Yeah.
So we need, you know.
But I like to hope that people, counselors, or when they're doing scheduling and or in the middle school, when they think this would be a kid who would be great for HASP, that's part of what they need to do too.
They do, for sure.
So it doesn't have to just be a parent who's in the know about some special little program in the school.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all. A very deep and interesting evening. For sure. Is there a motion to close the meeting? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.